Ladies and gentlemen, we are live, MythVision podcast. We're going to be continuing in this book, The Resurrection, a critical examination of the Easter story by author Jonathan MS Pearce. I already commented in the chat below his YouTube channel, and if you can't find it there, there is a description beneath every YouTube video, and I leave loads of links there if you guys want to help support. All of that stuff is there. So first things first, I want everybody to be sure, go down in the description, look in the chat above. If you're just tuning in, it's all down in the description. Here is his YouTube channel, A Tippling Philosopher. He's written a ton of books, but be sure to go subscribe to my friend here. These are my guests, and if you do subscribe, of course, then they always see that and want to come back on MythVision, especially if they're great guests, and I enjoy Jonathan's wisdom and insight. Also, he has tons of books on Amazon. That's down in the description as well, but you can go to Amazon.com and just type in his name. Oh, it's making it all blue here. Jonathan MS Pearce. You'll find out he has tons and tons of books. I have a bunch of them in person here, actually. We're going to get through some of these books as time goes by. I don't know if you guys can see me, but either way, got a lot of these books here. The Nativity, Metamorphosis, Unholy Questions, Did God Create the Universe from Nothing? All of these things, deep dive in philosophy. I also plan on having him on in other episodes to debate people that he may disagree with. I like them because it's more of like friendly discussion type debates, not so much who has the biggest ding dong. And then also the MythVision Patreon. I have to take the moment just to tell everybody who's tuning in, I have tons of material that is not public right now, like Jesus in the Hebrew Scriptures, Born Under the Law. These are all videos I did with Dennis McDonald and Richard Carrier in California recently. Also in Texas, I saw Eric Murphy, Zara Kay. I did a interview with an Islamic or Quranic scholar and Haitham Sidki. We did a whole hour and 20 minutes, something like that. That's on the Patreon as well. If you're interested in the Islamic stuff, go check that out. Some of the stuff you find leak out on YouTube. The point is, this is a way I can keep doing what I'm doing. And if it weren't for my Patreon, I would not be able to do this full time. So please consider helping and supporting, asking questions, harassing me in private messages, if you will, on Patreon. But also, I interview scholars asking your questions. So consider helping out MythVision. Become part of the family. I'll adopt you. You will become a son of God. And one day the apotheosis will occur. You'll come and visit me in my kingdom. I'll make sure you have everything you need. You'll have more than 72 virgins. Don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and jump into this. So welcome to MythVision Podcast, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for indulging me yet again, Derek. You are an officer and a gentleman. Good evening from the UK. It's late here and my brain will probably start short-circuiting soon, but I hope not.
Well, I read this thoroughly again earlier, and the post-resurrection appearances is chapters we previously touched on. Today we're going to be dealing with.
Well, actually, no. That's our next. That's our next one. The post-resurrection.
Oh, that's
appearances.
Right.
Yeah, we did the woman at the tomb, where there was a little bit of sort of appearing to the woman, arguably or not. And then the next one will be the post-resurrection appearances, and that's a big old one. There's loads of visions and hallucinations and analyzing what they are and the difference between them and the appearances. But this one is quite a technical one.
Yeah. It's Flesh and Blood or Spirit, Old Body Restored or New Spiritual Body, page 217 of his book, In the Resurrection, A Critical Examination. Look at all the greasy fingerprints. That's how you know I've been handling your book. This chapter is thorough. I want to give a warning up front to everybody watching. We will not be able to exhaustively delve into this topic, explaining why in every detail. Paul definitely does not know about the things the Gospels are talking about, what kind of body Paul has in mind. This whole chapter actually opens up a bigger enigma about Gnosticism. How far back does these ideas, or do these ideas really permeate in the early church? Are they second century ad hoc ways of protesting the Orthodox idea? Or is Paul out the gate this radically different kind of Christian, and the other guys are saying, whoa, we gotta tame this guy, you know? And they co-opt the movement of Paul by adopting Paul's ideas and yet giving him their own orthodox, Judeo-Orthodox, as Dr. Price recently wrote a book, Judaizing Jesus, where they're Judaizing Paul in a way to make him more, I don't know, orthodox is what we see that comes later. So there's no way we're going to cover all that. I
hope I do. It sounds weird for me to say. I hope I do my own chapter justice, because it's been like a year since I wrote that, and I'm going to pull out the disability caveat card here, which is I've got multiple sclerosis, so my brain doesn't quite remember what it should do, and I'm hoping I can remember everything I've written. I read it again yesterday and skimmed it again today. So no, it's going to be good fun, because this is a really interesting area. I remember reading. So Richard Carrier has a chapter in the fantastic anthology called The Empty Tomb, Jesus Beyond the Grave. I think it's a 2005 book. This is a really phenomenal book. And he's got a 126-page chapter on this topic alone. In other words, he's effectively written a book on this topic as to whether Paul is espousing this type of resurrection, or whether it's a bodily resurrection, a full-on sort of corporeal body, or there's a third option. So we'll get into that. Is there anywhere you want to start at all, Derek?
I think the first paragraph. I really felt like, let's go out the gate following the context that you have written here in this chapter. And just to point out, so everybody's following along, you said, and let me just open us up if that's cool. Many skeptics prefer to concern themselves with arguments about history, archaeology, science, and cold, hard facts. Can you blame them? No, you can't blame them. As a consequence, when analyzing claims such as the birth narratives or the resurrection of Jesus, skeptics might shy away from engaging with more theological and abstract arguments. However, theological arguments are often useful tools for the skeptic that can arguably supersede the whole enterprise of scrutinizing more tangible claims. For example, if we can theologically confirm, and I think we can, that Jesus' atonement is completely nonsensical, then we can pretty much write off the resurrection claims as read in the Bible. So it's not just the whole atonement thing. You go into this book, it's also the empty tomb. It's like every facet of the story here gets dismantled.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we have here is the thesis is that Paul is talking about a very different kind of resurrection. And this is where it gets a little bit theological. And for some people, they might find it a bit dry. You know, it's not like this is the sentencing, the customs of the Jews, and this is not this bit of history where we can like verify definitely something. This is like the theology of what Paul thinks versus the theology of what the gospel authors think. Right. So, you know, whatever floats your boat, but it's super important. So there are I think three options here. So my thesis is, and Carrier's thesis is, that Paul is claiming that the resurrection of Jesus is actually a transformation from a corporeal flesh and blood body to a different sort of body that is a spiritual body, but it's not fully spiritual, like just like a ghost type thing. It's a transformation of a body, but what will happen in that resurrection is that the flesh and blood body will be left behind. So that's one option, and I think that's what Paul is saying. The Gnostics had a slightly different version, which is it's just this spiritual body, almost like a soul type ghostly thing that comes. But again, the corporeal body would be left behind. And then you've got the gospel authors that seem to be very deliberately saying that Paul is wrong and that the Gnostics are wrong. Many people say that many Christians would say they're arguing against the Gnostics, right? I would say they're arguing against Paul and the Gnostics in saying that no, Jesus was a reanimated corpse. And what they do is they bring in the empty tomb. Paul doesn't mention the empty tomb at all, and we've mentioned this earlier, right? We mentioned this in another video, saying
it's okay to recap, though. Yeah.
This is kind of evidence that it's a later embellishment. So Paul didn't mention it, but it's added later by the gospel writers further down the line. Let's take this one step further. It's not just that it's a later embellishment, but actually the empty tomb is incoherent with Paul's theological claims of a spiritual resurrection, a spiritual body. In other words, Paul, if there was a tomb at all, it would have a body in. right? Under Paul's theology, it would have a body in. So I think what the later gospel authors are doing is they're staking a claim that this is a reanimated corpse. And we're going to do this by introducing this element of an empty tomb. This is our proof. And people like William Lane Craig, who these days say, well, that's a cornerstone of historical verifiability and of historical reliability for the whole resurrection story, is the empty tomb. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but this is actually just what the gospel authors are introducing to prove their point that it's a flesh and blood body. And so there's an empty tomb, which means Jesus got up, walked out, and then we have all these resurrection appearances and all this whole other narrative, none of which we really get in Paul, and we don't get it because it's incoherent with its theology. Does that sort of lay the groundwork here?
Yeah, maybe we should start at the earliest, right? As Christians, we were taught to read Matthew first, then Mark, then Luke, then John, maybe in that order. But that's typically the way that we go as far as, our reading. And then we find Paul later, or Acts, then we find Paul. And we're like, man, Paul's late in the game here. But really, Paul's the earliest for those who are just tuning in who aren't aware of this. So we should start early on. And I'll pull up the 1 Corinthians 15 here to read. So I'll blast through it and make it as coherent.
Yeah, it's quite a lengthy quote, but it's super, super important. This is Paul. I really don't see how Christians can argue against this, because and I've watched people online. Today I watched another video of I don't know if it's a Unitarian, but he was arguing against Trinitarians, but he was a Christian, and he was advocating a very prima facie, which means a very obvious reading of Paul, as you are just about to read, by saying, look at this. This is obviously this kind of resurrection, and this is not what many people think is the truth. Many Christians think is the truth, and they go along with these kind of interpreted gospel accounts. And
yeah, but real quick, shout out Troy Miller. Thank you, man, for supporting the channel. And your $9.99 is keeping us alive. You know what I'm saying? So thank you so much. I appreciate the love and the support. Everyone who always supports, man. I can't tell you how much this helps. It really does. So thank you for keeping us alive and rocking that MythVision. Damon Davis, you as well. Thank you so much. I appreciate the super chat. And Gnostic Informant, my friend Neil, one of my best friends here. Time to get pierced off, he said. All right, awesome. So let's go straight into this, because I think we need to read this passage of 1 Corinthians 15. I'm going to make this full screen for a second, so please don't get bored to death as I read. I'll try and make it quick and succinct. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 35. But someone will say, how are the dead raised? And with what kind of body do they come? You fool! That which you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And that which you sow, you do not sow the body which is to be, but a bare grain, perhaps of wheat or of something else. But God gives it a body, just as he wished, and to each of the seeds a body of its own. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one flesh of mankind, another flesh of animals, another flesh of birds, and another of fish. There are also heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is one, and the glory of the earthly is another. There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars, for stars differ from stars in glory. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown a perishable body, but it is raised an imperishable body. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. So also it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living person. The last Adam was a life-giving spirit. However, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, then the spiritual. The first man is from the earth, earthly. The second man is from heaven. As is the earthly one, so also are those who are earthy. What a weird name, term, earthy. And as is the heavenly one, so also are those who are heavenly. Just as we have borne the image of the earthy, we will also bear the image of the heavenly, the mystery of the resurrection. Now I say this, brothers and sisters, that flesh and blood, I repeat, now I say this, brothers and sisters, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I am telling you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. Is that the end? I think we're there, right?
Yeah, just the last couple of bits.
Okay, for this perishable must put on the imperishable, and this mortal must put on immortality. But when this perishable puts on the imperishable, and this mortal puts on the immortality, then will come about the saying that it is written, death has been swallowed up in victory.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I mean, wow. Right, to me, just
that was good.
You read that. But I'm in awe. But a prima facie, like, reading of that, understanding that is to me pretty obvious that he's talking about two separate things going on here. I mean, I don't think you could be any more explicit.
Yeah.
And I think many Christians, sort of lay Christians, would just blithely interpret that as just talking about resurrection. And he's just like, yeah, it's just changing, and he reanimates, and that kind of represents like the normal idea of a resurrection. But it's not. He's being very clear about the what's going on there, which is there are two types of existence there, and you get a transformation, a change going on. I mean, is that how you would interpret that?
It seems there is definitely a dualistic world in the mind of Paul. It sounds like there's a battle going on between two different things. It sounds very Platonic. If I may, I might as well play the apologist clip. I want everyone to know first, I'm going to be playing a clip from the 1 minute apologist, and it's Norman Geisler. There's something I didn't tell you about this. I actually went to a local school here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, when I went to my college. It's a college, don't get me wrong, but it's like, it's a Baptist type theological college. I went and got a bachelor's in biblical studies and theology, and pretty much trying to train you to end up going to seminary and become a pastor. The point is, the guy who was training me, named Thomas McCuddy, was a direct disciple, if you could use the term, of Norman Geisler. And Norman Geisler was there working with Ravi Zacharias. So it tells you like the kind of community of people that I was involved in while I was still a Christian. Now, let me go ahead and play this clip for everybody so they can hear the thinking. And I understand the thinking, but we're going to pick this apart as we go along so you could see what's going on in this resurrection scheme.
After Jesus' resurrection, what kind of body did he have?
He had the same body he had before, only it's now imperishable. It now can, walk through walls and doors and all of that, but it's physical, it's literal. He said it had flesh and bones, Luke 24. He says it had flesh and bones. The word flesh is used 4 times of the resurrection body. Once in Luke 24, it's used in Acts 2, 30 to 32. His flesh shall not see destruction. It's used in 1 John, and it's used in the 2 John. So every time in the New Testament, it's the same body. And I think one of the key verses is John 2. Destroy this temple. He said he was referring to his body. Mm-hmm. And in 3 days I'll raise it again. Yeah. The same one that dies is the same one that comes back. It had scars. Yeah, and he said, it is I, in Luke 24. Now, if that wasn't the same body that was crucified, then Jesus is lying. Then he's faking it. He's saying, here, I know this isn't real, and it isn't physical, and it's not the same body, but it is I. That would be deception. If Jesus didn't die and rise in the same body, then the devil won. God lost because the devil brought death, and Jesus never brought back to life what had died. It's a body that dies, soul doesn't die, it's a body that comes back. The devil won. And if Jesus didn't rise in the same body, then Jesus deceived us. The devil won, and we have no confidence of eternal life or seeing our loved ones again in the body.
Yeah.
Oh, where do I start? So, I mean, you've got Gnostic informant Neil on there, your friend. I did a video with him talking about the incoherence of Satan, the devil. Like the idea that he can say the devil wins. Well, the devil can only win if God lets him win, because God is omnipotent, right? So anything the devil does is on the behest of God. So that whole, the whole tack that he takes there is just complete nonsense. But the fact is, he is just citing the New Testament gospel authors to prove supposedly prove that Jesus resurrected in bodily form. Well, yeah, I agree with that. That's the point. They are making particular claims that are explicitly against, I would say, what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians here. So it's not, he's just completely whitewashing and ignoring like 1 Corinthians and just saying, well, yeah, Jesus said this, so I'm basically presupposing the truth of the Gospels, and that what they say Jesus said is therefore true, and I'm using that to establish this claim, rather than dealing with the fact that actually Paul says something completely different. Obviously says something completely different, and these guys are arguing against that, but they're doing that from a much later standpoint, where Paul has got access to the earliest witnesses, arguably is a much more reliable witness himself than these later Gospels, and yet he's relying on the reliability of John. He's like saying, I think the best example is John. Well, John is clearly arguing for a flesh and blood body as an argument, a counter argument against this Pauline thinking or this Gnostic thinking, because he then brings into the doubting Thomas into the story, who is poking Jesus in the wounds, and then Luke has Jesus eating broiled fish and all this kind of stuff, which are just arguments used to say this is a flesh and blood body.
I mean, it gets even more meticulous. This is why I like theology. It's not necessarily I like it because it's like this somehow validates my faith. Picking apart theologically what's going on shows you the inconsistency. He quotes John 2. In John 2, the author winks at the reader, and he's like, listen, he's talking about his body, the death of his body. If you go to Mark 14 and you look in the earliest gospel, Mark 14:58, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days we'll build another not made with hands. It's not the same as what is being said in John. And there's been a lot of, scholars who've commented on this and thought Jesus may have, historically, if they think there's a nugget here, may have been referring to the Jerusalem temple, which was made by human hands, not talking about himself, not, wink, wink. The author of John has to tell you, he's talking about him, his body. See, this is not the same as what John says. So Geisler's right when he's saying John's up to this. He's anachronistically putting all this stuff into Paul to be consistent with not only Paul, like with the Gospels, but with the early church fathers.
He's broadly ignoring Paul. I mean, he doesn't really make any reference to the
that's true. I'm just saying that's what they pump it into Paul's the point I'm trying. They're trying to make
they
roll over Paul like that pavement asphalt roller, smooth Paul out,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm going to bring to play Bart Ehrman from his book, How Jesus Became God. So this is something that Ehrman agrees with as well. So on page 176, he says, here Paul stresses that Jesus rose from the dead in a spiritual body. Both terms are important for understanding Paul's view of the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus was raised in a body, but it was a body that was spiritual. And later, page 177, but the body Jesus had when he was raised was not simply his resuscitated corpse brought back to life, as Norman Geisler would kind of argue. It was an astoundingly immortal body, a spiritual body, a body, yes, a material body, yes, a body intimately connected to the body that died and was buried, yes, but a transformed body that could not experience pain, misery, or death. And later he says on the same page, some modern readers have trouble understanding how there can be such a thing as a spiritual body that is still an actual body. The problem is that today we tend to think of spirits and body as two opposite things, with the spirit being invisible and non-material and the body being visible and material. But our spirit is intangible and body is made of stuff. Most ancient people, however, did not see spirit and body this way, which is why it is possible for Paul to speak of a spiritual body. It was widely believed in antiquity that the spirit we have within us was also made of stuff. It was material. So I think that's just a nice sort of way of introducing the issues here.
Interesting. Real quick, shout out to Troy Miller, man. Thanks a lot for the super chat. Most people think salvation is about being saved from sin. Salvation is only from death. So this brought up something else that was in this video clip that I empathize with the idea, right? And here, as a human, I mean, I think all of us, we all empathize with death. We all have to deal with the idea of death. And the idea is, well, if you're not going to be resurrected in a physical body, or you're not going to be resurrected, and we can know that that's actually happening, then, you know, what do we need to be resurrected for? And so the idea is, look, our loved ones that passed away, we want to see them again. We want to experience them again. And I think that's what Geisler's trying to say. Like, look, if this isn't true, then Jesus lied, and you know, Satan won, and the whole nine. Because he's like, don't you want to, at the end of the clip, he's like, don't you want to see your family members again, or something like that? Like, we want to see our family members again. Who doesn't want to? I mean,
this is the argument that Paul kind of uses for arguing the importance of the resurrection, and then people like William Lane Craig or any kind of apologist, which is the centrality of the resurrection. And if the resurrection isn't true, then all this other stuff isn't true, and we've got problems, and you know, an eternal life, and you know, Jesus is lying, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I understand why Geisler would say that, but I think Paul would kind of argue aspects of that as well. It depends just how you get from this life with a spirit inside us, you know, this flesh and body existence, to a heavenly existence.
Right.
And there are three different ways of doing that are very different. And I just think the gospel authors are arguing against the other two ways very explicitly. But yeah, so what your super chat question there, you know, is salvation about death, but also, you know, I think Paul has an understanding of atonement. He clearly talks about atonement. So I think he believes Jesus is an exalted divine being, but not God. But you can still obtain salvation through that, and atone for sins in the same way that, you know, the Jews believe you could kill a goat and that atones for sins, right? So it's not, you don't have to be a God for atonement to work. I don't think atonement works at all. I think it's completely nonsensical. But if you're going to argue it works, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a god, an exalted divine figure, like a Messiah, or a goat.
Yeah, it's confusing. Your book goes into all of this. I just wanted people to see that clip specifically. Yeah. They're so confident, like they get it. Like, we know what it means. We understand. They've had so much time figuring out ways to roll that roller on the asphalt and smooth over the problems that they've ignored everything. In fact, if you were to show them blatant contradictions, they would see no problem. Yeah. They're already prepared to just have responses without any type of consideration of it being possibly not what they thought it was. So yeah, going into your book, I had some marks. So a lot of this is like taking on William Lane Craig. You there's a lot of focus here.
Well, there is a little bit at the beginning. So William Lane Craig makes a claim that, you know, flesh and blood is like technically called a synodos, like just a phrase. And Robert Price takes issue with Craig doing this. He thinks flesh and blood means immortality, right? So he says that Paul is using this in a kind of figurative manner.
He doesn't mean it literally as flesh and blood.
No, it just represents immortality. But Robert Price criticizes him for doing this, because he says, if you say all hands on deck, right, it is a figure of speech, but it also literally means all hands on deck, because that's how you get the meaning of, like, you're all there and present because you've got both your hands there and you're ready to work. Like, if you had literally left like half of your hands behind, if you had chopped off a hand and you're not literally all hands on deck, then it kind of falls away. So you know, Robert Price says you have to have flesh and blood in there for that immortality to mean immortality. But it's not flesh and blood. I mean, this is what Paul is not saying. You know. So he's saying that Craig is trying to interpret Paul figuratively, when in order to do that, you have to say that flesh and blood is not integral in immortality, which would be a weird thing to say to represent immortality. If you're saying flesh and blood represents immortality, but you don't need flesh or blood.
You know, there's this debate that this is off record of the book specifically, but it deals with this topic. When I was a full preterist, I was trying to say Jesus did come back. The second coming did happen. And these full preterists like Don Preston are trying to communicate with the Orthodox world, Orthodox Christians. And as they're trying to, they'd have these debates. These Orthodox Christians would try to pin him down on the ascension. And they say, well, what do you believe happened to Jesus and at the ascension? Since you think his second coming happened, we believe that second coming is going to be just like he went up into the clouds in Acts 1 and 2. he ascended in Acts 1 into the clouds, the same way he will return. You will physically see him come. And they're like, well, what do you think happened? Well, these full preterists go, well, he discarded the body. And then when these guys are like, are you kidding me? No. Hypostatic union. You know, Jesus is always 100% flesh and 100% God. What are you talking about? Of course, that's later development because they're trying to fix these problems. Wake up, ladies and gentlemen. But here's where it gets even funnier. He justified it and goes, listen, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. This is why Jesus had to discard the body when he ascended to heaven. So, like, there's always some explaining, you know, and they are explaining. They're making up anything they can to make it fit, and that's what I notice.
Yeah, it's just jumping through hoops and you know, putting these sticking plasters on and ad hoc, post hoc rationalization that it just gets you in a bit of a mess, and it's just not an obvious reading of what's going on here. And the fact is they are bound. There's almost like they're shackled to this idea that everything has to be coherent. Like, you know, imagine picking up a book and saying, right, before I read this, 100% of this has to cohere. There can't be any, and it's all written by different people, and they're all making like all these different claims, but 100% of it has to cohere with every other part of it. You're like, oh, this is going to be tough. So then you go through reading it and go, right, okay, that seems to be a contradiction, but it can't be. So how can I make this work? And it's like, well, if there's a possibility here, this is what I term, and this actually came from Carrier as well, possibilita ergo probabilita, which is if it's possible, it can be probable, and if it's probable, yay, it can happen. You know, this idea.
Can I share that? I think people really need to see what you're saying in action.
You mean not good like 1 out of 100?
I'd say more like 1 out of 1 million.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Yeah! Boom! Drop mic. Thank you, Jim Carrey.
Right?
He's a great theologian. But he presents, that's perfect, right? Because that just goes to show it's like there's a chance. So the theologian's brain just goes, well, yeah, ding, ding, ding. You know, I've talked to you before about I had on Unbelievable, the radio show with Justin Brierley in the UK. I was on that radio show debating with Lydia McGrew about the nativity, and she presented all these counter arguments back to me, but they were all like slim possibilities, right? Every single one. And you look down the YouTube comments and like, yeah, she won that debate. She slam dunked him. I'm like, are you watching the same debate? And no, because of course, all she has to do is present an argument, right? And they don't assign any probability to it. They don't understand the probabilities, and they just go, she said something back to him, therefore that's the answer. Brilliant. She won that debate. And you're like, no, that's not how it works. You can't just present a 1 in a billion chance of something and say, there you go, that's answered that one. It's just, it's not how it works. But it may be for Jim Carrey.
So Troy Miller super chatted again. Thank you so much, Troy. I seriously appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. What about the zombies from Matthew?
Well, so we've talked about the zombies from Matthew quite a lot, and that's really interesting. So you could say, well, why are you bothering bringing that up again? Because we've already done that several times, whatever. Well, actually, Troy, good question, because there's this argument that Jesus is the first to resurrect, right? The first of the general resurrection, but actually, and it's not directly linked, or is it actually? What kind of bodies are these resurrected zombies? But they are arguably the first of the general resurrection, these saints that paraded around Jerusalem that many saw, except there's no evidence of this anywhere in the world apart from in the Gospel of Matthew. So, but yeah, what form were they in? What did the resurrection, general resurrection, what form of body or resurrection did Jews believe in? And I think that's a really, really interesting question. And I'd say it's more like the resuscitated corpse version. However, there are also interesting earlier examples of that can really set the foundations for Paul to believe in this two-body resurrection. So it's not like the Jews believed in general resurrection, which kind of probably looks like a resuscitated corpse, maybe. I mean, there's different arguments. But actually, no, people like Philo and others, and in fact, to go back to the empty tomb chapter, you know, if you really want to have a look at this, page 110 to 112, where Carrier talks about the two-body doctrine in Philo and Josephus. So these two talk about ideas of there being, a foundation being laid by other people for Paul's thinking. Just a quote from page 110. Philo says that salvation requires abandoning the body, quote, because the body took its substance from the earth and is again dissolved into the earth, as Moses is witness to when he says, "You are earth, and to earth you will return," citing Genesis 3:19. "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." Then arguing that whatever is assembled must be dissolved in the end. He concludes with an admonition to his readers, "And so depart from the earthly stuff that surrounds you. Escape, O fellow, from the abominable prison house of the body." Because some people, Philo says, make a truce with the body until the end and then are buried in it like an urn or coffin or whatever else you like to call it. But if any portion of their soul remains virtuous at death, that portion will be saved from oblivion, while everything corruptible, the body and any part of the soul tainted by or still clinging to the body, rots away. So on and so forth. Yada, yada, yada. It goes on and on. But the idea is that actually, there is precedence for belief in some kind of duality going on here.
Interesting. Thank you for that super chat, Troy, and my buddy Eric. I appreciate you, my friend Eric from Peru. Hi, bro. What is your guest view of Mark 16:12? After that, he appeared in another form unto two of them. Question mark. What means in another form? Regards from Lima, Peru. IO wins, baby. Love you, man. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. What do you think is happening?
It's a good question there, and I think I wouldn't even entertain it too much, because I would argue that anything after Mark 16:9 is an interpolation. So that part you'll find in brackets in most Bibles, because it's a later interpolation. So it's I don't. The simple answer is I don't really know what they're thinking. Whether they're trying to get away with a two body thesis that's similar to Mark, and whether that then gets later edited out. So maybe that is an earlier interpolation that pre-exists. Matthew and Luke and John, who then put their stamp down and say, no, this is definitely a bodily resurrection, which is a one form body.
Yeah.
But it's a really good question, but it is an interpolation, and I don't know how that would, I'd have to look into exactly when when scholars think that interpolation took place.
This really begs a question. Thank you so much for that, Eric. This begs the whole question of issues between the earliest movements. I just did a recording and released it on my Patreon today. I think it was today or yesterday. I can't remember. I've been doing nothing but edits, man. I work my butt off on these edits. And Richard Carrier and Dennis McDonald are discussing, did Christianity start as one movement that fractured off into different sects, or right out the gate, the followers of Jesus already are splitting off into splinter sects, out the gate, which means imagine everybody's following a modern day cult. Let's say everybody follows Elvis, and Elvis had all these things, and then he dies. All of his very close fans that admire him automatically already starting movements. They're bumping off talking about the Elvis cult. Just various sects right there out the gate. And here they are competing. No, Elvis did this. No, Elvis was that. And, there's already a framework in which the religion of Elvis would be going, or maybe various different philosophies from Greek schools, mystery cults, you name it. That's what they were saying. It makes me think what you're saying here. People are thinking we need to unite them. Why? Because later church fathers and the orthodoxers, if you will, have already done that. They've connected the dots for you. We need to go behind that. We need to peek behind the curtain and realize this wasn't as unified as you think.
Oh goodness, no. And what you also have to remember is, or think about, is literally just imagine yourself as one of those people, right? That is either delivering the good news or the content of your religion. You're some newfound evangelist. You've just been evangelized to, and you now believe. You never met Jesus. You maybe met some of the early followers, right? And then you go to another town. This is what Bart Ehrman talks about in how Jesus Before the Gospels. Really good book. I keep talking about that. It's a fantastic book. But imagine you're going and telling these stories, and then someone else is listening to these stories and going, yeah, okay. I don't quite understand that theology yet, but yeah, let's let's talk about it. Well, okay, that happens. I've talked to you, for example, Derek. I've delivered to you what I believe of everything about this religion, which I don't have access to. You've got to remember, I have not read the Gospels. The Gospels don't even exist yet. The Gospels do not exist, right? So I'm delivering you a bunch of stories and a bunch of theology, half-formed theology. You then take that on, and then I go back to wherever and then your job is now to spread that information that I've just given you and to talk about that. But then you haven't really properly understood it, maybe arguably, and then you're delivering that to other people. And so therefore that's what would really be happening. Just think about what it actually takes for people to spread ideas and stories, okay? And what is their objective? Is it 100% about accuracy? Everything I say, you now have to repeat back to me, so we make sure that you've got everything I've said to you accurate, right? And then when you go and say that, your objective is to be 100% accurate with what I say, or is your objective something else? Are you delivering just core elements and you can change the bits and pieces of the story? So you're going away and talking about stuff. I'm then going to other places talking about stuff. And these ideas are being half formed or being half communicated or being changed or whatever. There will undoubtedly be huge amounts of variation in the very early church. And that's what we see because Paul, let's go back to this spiritual against flesh and blood body, right? Paul is having an argument with the Corinthians. The first letter to the Corinthians, the second letter to Corinthians are arguing about stuff with them, right? This first letter to Corinthians is arguing about elements of the resurrection. Now we don't know what they wrote back to Paul, right? But they obviously disagree on how Jesus was resurrected. So already at this stage, we know there is a difference in understanding of how Jesus was resurrected. And that's just from this one letter, right? What about all the other communities we know nothing about, and we have no evidence of their existence or no evidence of what they believed necessarily in this early time, right? I imagine there would have been a huge variation. Sorry, it's a lot of talking to answer your question.
No, and there's so much more to it. What was meant, what was understood in Corinthians, what did the Corinthians probably think about this resurrection prior to Paul? You know, there's even these statements, I think in the pastorals, if I'm not mistaken, I used to say this as a full preterist because we used to point out that like the idea that the final resurrection could have already happened. There were people who believed that it already happened. If you go to Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, you'll see him say, they go, when will the repose of the dead happen? Look around. You don't see it, but it's already happened. And this idea is already a Gnostic thing, but there's Hymenaeus and Philetus is mentioned, and they're mentioned as people who are already teaching that the resurrection has already happened. So there's like, and I'm not talking about Jesus' resurrection, like the resurrection has already occurred. Are there people like, is it that crazy? Is it that wild, wild west in the early church with people teaching so many different types of things? And here you have Paul condemning or being very rude, if you will, very aggressive to the Galatians. Who has bewitched you? Another gospel. People are teaching other gospels. So what is the gospel but Christ crucified and rising from the dead and such? So it's...
Yeah, and we've got like Paul in Philippians 3, 20, verse 20 to 21. For our citizenship is in heaven, from which also we eagerly wait for a Saviour, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform the body of our humble state into conformity with the body of his glory. Right? This is consistent across Paul. Okay, yeah. It seems here, and it really is not coherent with what the later gospel writers are saying. And then, you know, going on to the Gnostics, I know you might have a video that might talk a little bit about the Gnostics, Derek. But you know, how early did the Gnostics were Gnostic theories and thoughts around? We're not 100% sure. People argue differently. I would argue that Paul's got a version of Gnosticism here, arguably, or you can see connections. You might want to talk about what Gnosticism is. I will, however, say that there has been a change in scholarly opinions about what Gnosticism is. It is not one movement of people, but a set of different ideas that different sects had that have been loosely categorized under the umbrella of Gnosticism. Okay, but it's not like there was one Gnostic sect, or there were sects that had complete Gnostic thoughts. They had just a whole smorgasbord of different ideas, some of which we now call Gnostic.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to quickly say, this is Bart Ehrman again, 178 from his book, How Jesus Became God, talking about the spiritual resurrection, which is now what the Gnostics thought. Some ancient Christians taking a line very similar to that found among Paul's opponents in Corinth. So this could be that the Corinthians were Gnostic. And Paul is arguing, no, it's not spiritual. It's a body, but it's a spiritual body. But it's not a flesh and blood body.
Yeah, flesh and blood. Yeah, I'm gonna play a few clips after this. I think everyone watching, stay tuned. Thanks for tuning in. Hit the like button. Drop a comment. We'll read these super chats after you're done.
Yeah, opponents in Corinth maintained that Jesus was raised in the spirit, not in the body, that his body died and rotted in the grave, as bodies do, but that his spirit lived on and ascended to heaven. This view became prominent among various groups of Gnostic Christians. I will discuss, this is what he says later, the next page, I will discuss this view, blah, blah, blah. So at this stage, it is enough to stress that for many of these Gnostics, the figure we think of as Jesus Christ was not a single person, but was actually two persons, a divine being from above who had come temporarily to inhabit the material body of the man Jesus. In this view, the material body belonging to the material world and to the inferior God who created it was transcended at Jesus' death and resurrection, such that the body was killed, but the divine spirit, which was distinct from it, was not touched.
Yeah. He wanted to say hey to everybody. Say hey to everybody.
Hello.
So hey, 200 and something people watching you, buddy.
Let me see. Where?
Look in the upper corner.
Oh.
See it? Yeah.
Oh, 203.
203. Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Isn't that awesome? Say hey to my friend Jonathan.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hi there. I'm talking to you all the way over from the UK, from England.
UK?
Yeah, Great Britain, England.
All the way far away. Across the ocean.
Yeah.
Which one?
The Atlantic. Well, both, if you, depending on which direction you want to go. But obviously we would go that way. But buddy, go inside. Mommy will be home with the food in a minute. And thanks for saying hey to everybody. Okay. Love you. All right, couple super chats, and then I'm going to show you a few interesting clips. Indo, thank you for the super chat. If ancient people wanted to prove Jesus didn't rise, why didn't they just go to the tomb and check, or say how there was no tomb and write about it? So may I comment on this and then get you to emphasize? We did a few shows. I highly recommend you go and watch our 7. So far, there's been 7 videos in this series. This is the 8th. Go back, watch, go through the series. We talk about how the authors and the agenda, by the time these gospels are being written, there seem to be some people who are really skeptical of this whole movement. And they're really challenging these authors because they're writing things purposefully to address the current issue, whatever that issue may be. Matthew, we see it with the guards at the tomb. Like even to this day, there's still people who have these certain ideas about Jesus and his resurrection. If these are being written after the war, you wouldn't know where to find this tomb and how to prove that, this is where it was at and this is where the body is. There's no way to validate, especially after a war like that in 70 AD. But it's so late in the game. Someone told me that too. They're like, all right, I tried to play in their head. Like, imagine Joseph of Arimathea actually buries Jesus. But I say he's not a disciple. I say that this guy is just being a noble Jew. And he's respecting the Torah. And he's actually doing what he's supposed to in a situation like this. So he ends up burying him. He's not going to call, Mary Magdalene and say, hey, we've got body 4325 down here buried in tomb number. He's not letting them know like, hey, I'm moving your Lord's body tomorrow over to this new spot. And they could have come to an empty tomb that it was relocated in. Who knows? But then if I said that, they go, well, wouldn't the Sadducees or the Pharisees or the Sanhedrin, wouldn't they have come out and said, we know where we put the body. Nice try, movement. All of that is thinking that this movement was doing this, 30 days after this happened. This is assuming that right away, everybody's shouting from the rooftops and everyone in Judea knew about this. And all they had to do is go find the corpse, which, by the way, by 30 days, would you even recognize it?
So
That's a
yeah,
whole
we
other
talked
question.
about this. So it would be illegal as well to do that, but they didn't start shouting about this stuff till apparently 50 days later. You know, Pentecost and whatnot. So
Yeah.
it was not verifiable. But the point is
Yeah.
that there's no mention of the empty tomb at that point. So this is only a later addition that's arguably decades later, right? And significantly after the fall of Jerusalem. So there's no way of verifying anything to do with any tomb. You know,
Yeah.
Jerusalem's been sacked. Now, likelihood is, as we talked about, is that Jesus was buried in a criminal's graveyard in the necropolis, and there you go. That his followers either didn't know where he was, or it was a completely dishonorable burial, and the whole later narrative of the empty tomb is a complete legendary embellishment. And when it became a legendary embellishment, i.e., when after Mark had written it, so Mark's writing arguably just after 70 CE, which is 40 odd years after the death of Jesus. No one's going to be able to verify this, and no one even wanted to verify it, because we talked about this before. Not only were the claims not verifiable, but there was no desire to verify it, as according to even the Gospels themselves. No one particularly undertook the process of verifying claims in any meaningful way. So it's just that didn't happen. And in fact, you know, the Jews knew this, so they were then starting to bring up counter arguments against this, which is why Matthew brought the guards of the tomb to say, actually, no, there were guards of the tomb, and that's why. But of course, the tomb never existed anyway. It was a later embellishment. Yada yada yada.
Yeah, it goes on and on. Watch the series though, for sure, because there's tons of stuff. I don't know which one you've seen, Indo, because I've seen you in here probably in some of these that we've done, but we go and address this in like a whole chapters dealing with these ideas. So thank you. And Eric's back for more. He says, does Jonathan believe that the resurrected new body is taken from the Book of Enoch, where Enoch was transformed into an angel? Again, IO wins, baby.
Do you know what? I'm going to say I don't know. And do you know what? I haven't studied the Book of Enoch. However, I will say this. It is coming up all the time at the moment. It is a hole in my areas of where I've researched and looked into. And the Book of Enoch appears to be much more important from what maybe I'm getting into particular skeptical circles, but it appears to be much more important in the formation of ideas than I've ever given it credit for. What's your, how much do you know on the Book of Enoch, Derek?
I mean, I've read it a couple times, but I've never done like a deep scour to try and see if Paul is Enochian. You know what I mean? Like how Enochian is Paul and his thinking. I mean, when we find out how disparate different sects are with different views, you know, this is why scholars think that when they found the Enochian literature in the Qumran, you know, caves, people try to say these are one group that had all this literature. And no, they're saying there are people who say, no, this is collected from various groups with different literature, that the Enochians were not like the typical, if you will, what we would call Jews of Judaism. They went into Enoch as their figure rather than Moses. They skipped the Torah. They weren't fans of the Torah and the temple, you know, sanction. They were all Enochian, which made it more universal. And there's a lot of scholarship on this, but I have not done a deep dive on Paul and Enoch. Like,
I mean, the question is Paul going to be well versed in the literature? Arguably, yes. To the point where it's important to him, it's impossible to know. You know, we just, it's all about inferences. Can you make connections to the Book of Enoch to Paul's writing? I presume you can, and I presume people do. I need to look into how credible that is, but it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, my friend Dragons in Genesis, he's a big, Jason folks is big in the Enoch. And
Tim Mills as well, you know, harmonic atheist, is a big fan of the book. He thinks that's like the really important.
It does do, it's definitely a pivotal book. And you know, as old as it is another interesting thing to think. This is pre-Christian, so this might have some roots to what we see in Christian literature. Definitely would say look into that. So I'm gonna play a couple clips, and ScholarVid is in the chat. He's been here since the start. There's a super chat he asked of Steve Mason, and I just took the clip and said, let me play this and let everybody see what Professor Steve Mason, New Testament scholar, also Josephus expert, this is what he had to say. So bear with me. Scholar Vid, thank you for the super chat. He says, the resurrection. Do you think the hallucination hypothesis has legs? Post-bereavement for Peter and post-traumatic stress for Paul or something?
Yeah. I think we talked about this a little bit in a previous chat when we were discussing early Christianity, the first generation, and the development of the resurrection story. I don't know, but here's what we can see historically, that the story of the resurrection develops from the earliest account is in 1 Corinthians 15, in that letter by Paul. That's the first description he gives. And there he makes it very clear. He's talking about spiritual body that does not have flesh and blood. Flesh and blood cannot go into heaven. Jesus, who had become, so whereas Adam had been breathed into matter and became a human being, Jesus did the opposite thing. He undid Adam and he became a life-giving spirit. He became a spirit. What goes into the ground is not what comes out. What goes in is flesh and mortal, and what comes out is spirit. So in 1 Corinthians 15, he makes it very clear that the resurrection body is spiritual. I think that's clear. And also that
you'd be shocked at how many people think. I'm sure you know.
I know, but just as I read it, I think that's pretty clear because he keeps driving it home. And he keeps saying, when I said resurrection, you all thought I meant physical resurrection. No. That's crazy. I didn't mean that. And the way that people know that Jesus is risen from the dead is that this spiritual presence appears to them. So I don't think we need to resort to the idea of hallucination or any particular psychological disturbance or disorder.
Interesting. Dude, I just wanted to take the clip, let you hear it from the man himself. He's on the same page.
That is a brilliant clip because that's perfect. And I love the way he's like, well, it's an obvious reading of 1 Corinthians.
He doesn't even bat an eye. That's what I love about him. He's like, okay, this is what it says. And this is what it's so obvious what this is saying. And then what do they do in Luke and John? They pack Jesus with flesh and blood.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you doing? No wonder the preterist guy was like, no, it's Jesus was floating up into heaven. He got rid of his flesh and blood. Don't worry.
And it's really interesting. It's quite, you could almost just forget he said that. But Steve Mason there said, about the appearances. And I think what explains the fact that no one recognizes Jesus? But then it is the gospel authors who are saying it's the flesh and blood Jesus, isn't it? But I don't know. It's just so incoherent. Like it's nonsense because they're saying this is the flesh and blood Jesus, but no one seems to recognize him. So it's obviously theological. I keep mentioning in the book, it's theology, not history. These guys are not writing history; they're writing theology, and they're writing theology a lot later. They're just making stuff up here to make a theological
in that
point.
Story, let's talk about the two men on the way to the road to Emmaus. Okay, this whole thing. They don't recognize him. The scripture, notice the scripture, when he talked about the scriptures and what was written about him, Jesus, they burn in their bones like Jeremiah, they got a burning in my bones, and they're feeling this, what is being addressed here by Steve Mason, this experience that they're having from this literature. And what is the whole, then he breaks the bread with them and then they notice it's him. Well, there's a lot of people who say this is theology of suggesting that the presence of Christ is in the communion, in the Eucharist, and that this isn't literal physical, but it's like that. But even Dale Allison said, he was like, this is the closest thing to kind of a ghost story too that we find. So it's, there's also this addressed point blank. Dr. Price talks about, what does he call it? Form criticism or something. He says like when the book says something, consider what it's saying and be picky. So like, this is not a cleverly devised myths, brethren, as some would suppose. I want to talk to those guys. Who's supposing these are cleverly devised myths? Why are you saying that? Tell me what, I want those guys. We don't have them. But why is the book saying that if people aren't saying that? So when he says stuff like, I'm not a ghost, I have flesh and blood. Who's saying that Jesus is a ghost? There's people out there probably teaching and saying, hey, this is just a spirit. This is just a ghost. This is not literal flesh.
So this is exactly it. So why? So the question comes back to, why are the gospel writers saying what they're saying? So why bother mentioning that Jesus eats broiled fish? Why would Luke bother to mention that? Why does John get Thomas to touch Jesus? Right? He's doubting that he is who he is. We can see him. So it's about the corporeal flesh and blood. They are making a point to argue against the Gnostics, and I think this then goes back to the idea. I'm going to read you a little bit from my book, page 223. So concerning the Corinthians with whom Paul is arguing, why would they have any doubt at all about the form in which Jesus resurrected? According to the Gospels, Jesus rose and appeared, ate and drank with plenty of witnesses, and left his tomb empty, unless, of course, the legend hadn't yet developed, as we see it in the later Gospels. Personally, the whole basis of the conversation with the Corinthians is a strong argument for this thesis, i.e. the two-body thesis. Mm-hmm. And on this point, if Paul had knowledge of all these events, why did he not bring them into play? So this is super important for me. Yeah. Why did he not bring them into play, apart from in very generic appeared to terms, but not being handled, not eating fish, etc.? Paul makes no reference to any eyewitness to Jesus' resurrection beyond what he calls an inner revelation. So you would imagine, like, going back to reading that, 1 Corinthians 15, and you didn't read it all, right? But you read a good chunk of it, right? That would be the perfect time for Paul to be mentioning some of these stories, right? If he's talking about the resurrection of Jesus, why is he not mentioning anything that we see in the Gospels? Because that's the perfect time to mention it.
I mean, you couldn't say it better. And this is what we're trying to tell our apologist friends. Listen, like, he should have mentioned Thomas touching him. I mean, literally, here he is touching his flesh, proving he's resurrected from the dead. This is real. It's obvious that they're working out these problems. And another thing, love Del Allison Jr. He's far smarter than me in so many ways I can't even compare. But I think it's a weak apologetic. And I told him this. The idea that 1 Corinthians 15 does not mention the women at the tomb, and that they are the first eyewitnesses, right, that are there, that are experiencing it, that aren't the Romans and Matthew, but that's a whole nother problem. The point is, they're there and they're seeing, at least they're seeing an angel that's telling them. They're the first people who are being addressed.
But sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. So I really apologize.
Go ahead.
But Mark is using those women. Mark says they run away and they don't tell anyone. Okay, and that gets embellished later by the fact they run away and tell people straight away, right? So there is a contradiction between Mark and the other Gospels. The other Gospels are changing things for reasons of their own agenda, but Mark is very clear here, and he says the women run away and don't tell anyone. And this is Mark's argument as to why no one has yet heard of the empty tomb. So yet another argument to suggest that Mark made up the empty tomb, because he's the first person to write about it, because he says the women ran away from the empty tomb and specifically says they told no one. And that's the end. That's basically how it's left. So they run away, they tell no one. Now, Luke and Matthew and John have them running away and straight away, literally straight away tell people. So that's as flat a contradiction as you can get. You cannot have those two things. Now, I think that's because they're all sorts of, they want all these appearance narratives to prove it's a bodily resurrection, right? And all this, the empty tomb being embellished and all this kind of stuff. Whereas Mark is just like, you know, he died, there was an empty tomb, and the woman ran away and didn't tell anyone, and end of story. And I think it goes to show that the empty tomb is just a much later invention, and it's completely disagreeing with what Paul's saying.
I agree. My whole point was simply just saying that the women, like, Paul does not know about them. And I think Del Allison was saying, no, I think this is a historical kernel and that the women really did appear at this tomb. And like, he was holding on to this, making this argument. And I'm like, and his argument was, well, they were androcentric. They were mainly about men. And I said, he's like, the early Christian movement, Paul, all of them were androcentric. And I'm like, can we just apply that to also Mark, since he's also an early Christian guy? Like how come they do and Paul doesn't then? If they're all androcentric, this would make no sense. it seemed to be inconsistency, and it made me think that, I talked to Dale. He's very open to me, and he's like, Derek, the reason I'm a Christian is my experiences that I had. It's not that this is factually accurately, we know for sure this is true. He openly says things in his book that Christians cringe. They cannot stand that he says those things in his book. So he battles and tug of war of this honesty and like wanting to believe it's true, and at the same time trying to be accurate with the information. And I said, I'm sorry, I just don't find this accurate. But he said, I personally don't think that what Bob Price says about it, though, is accurate either, where he thinks this is an early, the women appear to the god's tomb, as they did with Zeus and they did with Osiris, you name it. Like Isis shows up for Osiris at his tomb, the whole thing. They're looking for the dead body. And that this is like a women cult following Jesus, this divine figure or whatever. He says he thinks Bob goes too far. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But why doesn't Paul talk about it? We shouldn't be acting like this continuity and that Paul knows about women at the tomb but just doesn't mention them. That to me is overstepping boundaries.
I have no good reason to suggest that he wouldn't mention them for a particular reason. The only reason he doesn't mention them is because they haven't been invented yet. That's the obvious reasoning to me, and it's obvious because actually he has no need of an empty tomb because he's got a spiritual resurrection, not a bodily resurrection. There you go.
He wouldn't need it. Scholar Vid, thank you again for the super chat, my friend. In Paul, the resurrected body is made of pneuma, breath, wind, or spirit, as some people say. In Luke, Jesus eats fish. How can a body made of breath have a digestive system?
It can't. I mean, that's a problem. And I'm just going to, do you know what? Thanks, Scholar Vid. Really good question. I will come back to that in a second. But it's just reminded me of the fact that a human body is mainly made up of other organisms, isn't it? Our digestive tract.
You mentioned that, yeah.
Right at the beginning of the chapter. It's just almost a little bit of a joke. I talk about that if Jesus was resurrected in flesh and blood resurrection, as the Gospels claim, and ate broiled fish, right? Actually, you'd be resurrecting millions of other organisms. So it's like the general resurrection is a resurrection of all his gut flora, and all this other sort of the other organisms.
46% of the body's organism is like human. The rest is like bacteria and all sorts of other stuff that is required to be.
Only 43% of the cells on and within the human body are human. Sources they do vary wildly on that estimate, but most of the cells on and within the human body are bacteria, fungi, and archaea. Therefore, in order for Jesus to experience a proper bodily resurrection, there needs to be the resurrection of literally millions upon millions of non-human organisms. You can eat, break bread, eat fish, drink. Without you cannot eat without the proper function of this microbiome. The resurrection of one human is the resurrection of millions more entities. So I thought that's just quite fun.
Just an interesting fact, right? To point out, like, you got a lot of work to do resurrecting someone. Thank you so much, Scholar Vid.
But Scholar Vid's got a Paul's word to describe the new bodily form is pneumatikos, and is contrasted with flesh and blood of the psychikos body. So we think psychic as being mental, but actually psychikos is the flesh and blood body. Carrier in his book in that chapter carries out a detailed lexical analysis of Paul's language throughout the body of his writing, no pun intended, to leave the reader in no doubt as to what Paul was referring to, that the pneumatic body of the resurrection of Jesus was a different body to the psychic one that was crucified. And rather than saying that one becomes another or transforms into the other, he emphasizes their separateness. So, he sees these as two different things, and that's consistent throughout Paul's writing. Did you want to say anything else?
I've got a couple clips we could play when you're ready.
Yeah.
So thank you, Robin, for that super chat or super sticker. I appreciate the love. That goes a long way. Let's pull up our good friend, Dr. James D. Tabor, who wrote a wonderful book on Paul. I highly recommend everybody to get a copy of that. He spent like 3-4 decades on Paul, and he's fascinated with Paul. Here's what he has to say on the topic when I'm interviewing him. I think I need to play this at 2x speed. Let me see. I hope it's not too fast, but I'm going to rewind it back just to get people acquainted. All right, here we go.
Professor Tabor, you just mentioned that Paul's
version of understanding the resurrection, if I can use that term, really cosmic resurrection, started with Jesus.
Cosmic transformation.
Cosmic transformation.
Yeah. Which included Jesus' resurrection.
Exactly.
As the firstborn of many.
I think it's interesting. He talks about there's a resurrection for the stars. It seems like our transformation of the stars, transformation of this. He's not just talking about flesh and humans, and it's much bigger. And it's a really pretty chapter if you consider what he's trying to think of, like a better world. But one of the heart of the issues, if I can get there, is Christian apologists are adamant, as church creeds teach and whatnot. There's an authoritarian approach. You don't buck against the church. However, you being a scholar who does not have that authority telling you what you must think on this subject, but you want to get to the heart of the problem, as do I. Paul is the earliest source. What did Paul think Jesus rose from the dead was? What was this resurrection to him? Was this a real guy who was killed by real Romans?
Someone says too fast. I'm going to slow it to 1.5. All right, here we go.
Possibly Jews involved in some sense. We talked about the Pharisees potentially being liberal in many ways. We don't know if they were collabing. We don't know. Yeah. I'm saying that to say maybe you might have a comment on these things as we go. But Paul, did he think Jesus' blood resurrection occurred? You mentioned this. I don't want to tease anyone. I want you to say it. They got to go read your book too, because you actually become a source about a teacher of righteousness, or one of these teachers who's written, who dies, and supposedly rises in 3 days, but they know his corpse is in the wilderness here. Like, what is this?
Simon of Perea.
So here we have the earliest.
Let me mute my mic. No echo.
Station. Paul believes he did rise from the dead. If he did not rise, our faith is in vain. What does he mean? Because church fathers and Christianity says, no, he rose physically, and so will we. They go to later gospels. So starting earliest, what is the chronology and what happens with this whole thing?
Well, let's start with Paul. He tells us what his view is.
Right.
And earlier in 1 Corinthians 15, he says that Jesus died, and certainly other places he says by crucifixion, the cross, the stauros, the stake. So he died. He was buried. So he says he was buried. So I'm fine with the burial, Paul. That's early. First tradition. And he rose. And then he was seen or appeared. So what we got is a sequence: death, burial, and appearances. Okay. Empty tomb is probably irrelevant in this sense of, that would be the gospel stories of somebody went and the stone was away, and I want to get to that. But in terms of the substance of the resurrection, if somebody has just died 2 or 3 days later, in the case of Jesus, or even at the parousia, when Jesus comes, he says the dead in Christ will rise first. Let's say someone died 1 hour before the parousia. Their body's hardly cold. Okay, they're still going to get transformed into this glorious body. So let's forget Jesus a minute. Let's put this corpse on the table. Died an hour ago. We're weeping, we're crying. Maybe women are washing the corpse, getting ready for burial. And all of a sudden Jesus returns. And we're watching the corpse. Now, does that corpse get up and go, oh, wow, I'm resurrected now. Man, I'm hungry. I think I'll have some food. Or this is a cosmic.
People say we can reconcile science and faith. No, we can't.
Like event where and I'm a living guy and I'm getting transformed. All of a sudden I look like something. You'd have to have CGI, probably some sort of whirling. I'm turning from the physical mortal state into the glorious state that we picture in terms of shining and glory and incorruptible. Well, the same thing's going to happen to that dead person. So I guess if we could video it, it would look like some sort of light energy or something. Just now, would there be a residue of something left or something? Would it look like, the table's empty now? Oh yeah, there's the new glorified George up there. He's with us. You got to think of it like that, because what happens is, because Jesus was killed 3 days before. I think he died on a Thursday, and they discovered the tomb empty, according to the Gospels, on a Sunday. But because it's recent, people get into the body. But for Paul didn't care about bodies, bones, anything. He just think of all the varieties of death. Dust and ashes is the way to think of it. Everything finally goes back to the dust eventually. And many graves are unknown. And remember, those who are at sea, which is the most disposable kind of place to be buried, because I don't think you'll last long in the ocean. So we're not interested in any of that. You see, it's the same process. So what is the process? The process is to take, you could call it the soul, the spirit, the essence of that person, which is in God's keeping. And you say, yeah, but he just died. But if the spirit has left the body, do we need the body to get the resurrection so we can transform the body to something spiritual? Not according to Paul.
I don't know if I need to keep going. The whole video goes into this and how he addresses this evolution of thought in the Gospels. How he does everything that all the other scholars do, and pointing out this development that keeps happening.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see what the distinction would be. How different would that be from a Gnostic understanding? Is the Pauline, if he's saying that that's a Pauline understanding, is that pretty much in sync with the Gnostic understanding, or is that transformation? Is it just a spirit, or is there some transformation into a new body that is still material in some manner, made of stuff? But then Paul would have thought that the spirit was still some kind of stuff. So there are nuances there, but the idea is it isn't just this reanimated corpse getting up and then walking off like a zombie. As he talks about, it's interesting to make the to talk about corpses that die at sea, and and rotting corpse, what's going on there, and the time difference if you're just reanimating a corpse, and that's what I talk about. Sort of mention about Jesus being, if you do believe, like the Gospels, that he's been reanimated, it's a real cherry-picked Jesus, because he's evidently in lovely clothes, or maybe he's been dressed after death and embalmed, but he seems to have some of the wounds. But has he got scourges? Where's all the blood? Is that still seeping out? Is he really pale, and or is he like brought back to just a slightly perfect version, but not fully perfect, because he's still got some wounds? It's like this really cherry picked, not very well thought out idea of what Jesus is.
Yeah, that was something that made me go, he's arisen in an incorruptible body. And Christians today imagine Jesus with holes in his hands right now. Like, like he legitimately has scars, if you will, on his side, and he has these scars. So, yeah, I mean, he's also supposedly has a tattoo on his side or something like that. The Book of Revelation seems to imply. I'm not really sure. But Shireen, thank you for the super chat. She says, what do you think? Paul was a narcissist? His way is the only way, and confused by well-educated word salad to strong-arm his understanding of reality. So that's an interesting super chat. Wasn't this a common understanding in Hellenism, though, these ideas?
Of what ideas in particular?
I suspect maybe even resurrection had a bad taste in many people's mouths, but the idea of spiritual...
Yeah, well... You get the development of ideas of heaven and hell coming out of the intertestamental period, which is as a result of like in the Seleucid Empire, depending on how you pronounce it, you had Jews being oppressed, right, by Hellenized Jews, and then saying, hang on, we're the chosen people. How come we're being oppressed? What's going on? Why does bad stuff happen to good people, and why does good stuff happen to bad people? So then they looked at the Greeks and saw, or the Hellenized sort of Jews, and saw this understanding of Tartarus, of the afterlife, and thought, hang on, this is good, because really, in the Hebrew Bible, there isn't really an afterlife that's particularly important throughout. And you'd think, man, for most Christians nowadays, that's like the most important thing about life is the afterlife. Like, that's where we're going. Well, if it doesn't really exist in the Hebrew Bible in any like coherent form, then it can't be that important. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So then I think the Jews saw this, and then we start seeing a development that maybe ends up in Christianity of these ideas of Greek ideas of the soul that can transcend your earthly body, and so maybe that's where we end up with Jesus. But certainly, as far as a question there, which is was Paul a narcissist? I think if you are going to be a religious leader in an early religious movement, I think you're going to have to be some kind of sociopath or narcissist to some degree. Maybe I think that's really what kind of personality was Paul, or was he just a really infectious, charismatic leader that realized he had to politically bring people together and unify them? And in order to convince Gentiles, you have to throw away, like we talked about before, some of these Jewish rules. Like, no, you don't have to cut the end of your penis off, because that's obviously not what you're going to want to do, and it's going to be a real tough sell. So I'm going to have to change some of this stuff around, and then I'm going to have to market. There's a really interesting documentary now on Amazon called Marketing the Messiah, which is I think a really interesting name for the documentary, because that's really what people like Paul were having to do, which is marketing this idea out to people out there. Well, how am I going to convince them? It needs to be coherent, but we also need to get all these people on board, and I need to convince people, and I'm not going to convince them by coming along with 613 Jewish laws. So we've got to drop that stuff, and we've got to reinvent the Jewishness within Jesus, so we can still get the Jews on board, but also
I think that mattered early on. I think early on getting Jews on board mattered, and then it wasn't too long after that they were like, yeah, it doesn't even matter anymore, Yeah. And then you even have people today that it goes so far. Was Jesus even a Jew? I mean, there are people who actually make these ridiculous anti-Semitic claims, like, no, let's make some theories up to figure out how Jesus wasn't actually a Jew now, and it's like, what? It becomes absurd, but that evolution takes place the same way it goes from Jewish only to Gentile. I think you see a clear development taking place in early Christianity. and competing sects within the New Testament. That's the detail. That's where people don't. I think people go, "Oh, I'm okay with just Martyr talks about these Gnostic types and Valentinius over here. They're all good with talking that." But
that's a great point. I was going to come on to that because actually that's a really good argument to say that there were these existent ideas and sects of people who had, say, Gnostic or beliefs in a different resurrection taking place, because you had the Gospels, I think, were the argument against that initially, and then this was built on by the early church fathers. So Justin Martyr, if you look at on the resurrection that he's written, is chapter 2, I think, on the resurrection, objections to the resurrection of the flesh. So he's dealing with objections. So Justin Martyr is really putting forward an argument that flesh and blood is okay, because the Gnostics were like, flesh and blood is base and sinful, and therefore, that's not what's going to be resurrected. The Gospels are against that. Justin Martyr is like hammering that home and saying, actually, this is fine. So
in your book, you go into this and you really nail the whole, like, the early church was very physical flesh. And they even make an argument that's really convoluted. You don't spend too much time in this chapter, but you talk about how they want to say, no, the body is good. This tells you there's a dilemma in different versions of Christianity. They believe that the body is good because it's God's creation. And this is what makes me really think Paul is this serious enigma. I have to play a clip by David Litwa, if you don't mind, just to give people real quick. And then I want to read just Hymenaeus and Philetus and 2 Timothy to give people an idea. Even if it is a forgery, it just tells you that there's still these ideas floating around.
Yeah, and I would advise people read, Justin Martyr chapter 2 on the resurrection, which you can find online variously. But yeah.
So here was my conversation. And by the way, was this the first one? Let me see. I think this one was the first one. I could be wrong. This might be the second one. I did another one. This is the second one. So this one has not been released to the public. This is all Patreon only video right now. So nobody's seen this but Patreon members. Here's a little bit of an idea to give you guys a taste of another scholar's thoughts. Let me mute myself. Is there something like that red flags to you that's major?
Well, so in part 2 of the book, I go through all of the passages of the New Testament that Marcion dealt with. And I've talked about, in a previous session, I've talked about 2 Corinthians 4:4, which says that the God of this world has blinded people from seeing the light of the truth of Christ. And the God of this world being taken as a reference to the Creator. And that's a logical reading. It's not a reading taken by many Christians today, but it's a logical reading because who else would the God of this world be but the Creator? And who else would the Creator be but the Judean deity? And we know from Isaiah chapter 6 and many other passages of the Old Testament that the Judean deity, Yahweh, blinds people from seeing truth. And any God that blinds people from seeing truth is simply a monster, not a God at all. So that's a Marcionite reading. Marcion also paid very particular attention to something which, again, goes against the trend of modern Jesus studies. Marcion paid attention to the place where Jesus destroyed the Jewish law, Jesus himself. And Marcion, of course, wasn't interested in what we call the historian's Jesus or the historical Jesus. He was interested in the Jesus of the Gospels, and he just could point by point, just go through and say, here's where he broke the Sabbath. Here's where he disobeyed food laws. Here's where he shouldn't have touched a leper. Here's where he did X. Here's where he did Y. All this is against Jewish law. And then Jesus ends up dying. Why does he end up dying? Well, from the Jewish perspective, it's because he disobeys Jewish law. He's viewed as a transgressor. But who's the author of Jewish law? Well, again, for the Jews, it's God, or their God, Yahweh, who spoke the Jewish law supposedly on Mount Sinai. So Jesus transgresses the law of the Jewish God. If he transgresses the law of the Jewish God, he must think that the law of the Jewish God is on some level wrong. And who's going to be pissed off by that? The Jewish God. So the question is,
I can't. That's my tease. That's my tease to tell people there's hundreds of videos like this that have not made it out on YouTube. Go join MythVision's Patreon, please. But I say this to say, Jonathan, this isn't necessarily here's the resurrection, right? He's not talking about the resurrection, but it's in this vein of Paul. What is Paul doing? Is Paul dichotomizing flesh and this earth and this world that was created by the Judean God as evil, and saying, this flesh, I have a thorn in my flesh, this is not good, I can't wait to put on the spirit of immortality, you know, this new body. And this makes me think that Paul is radically different than we think he is. We try to harmonize an orthodox Paul. I wonder if he's more radical than we think.
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, there's so much to Marcionism. It's just like, I'd say if I was a Christian, I'd be a Marcionite. Yeah, but I wouldn't, because it's all just complete nonsense. But I really understand that the Jesus of the New Testament is so different from Yahweh of the Old Testament. And if you believe that, then how do you square that circle? Because there are so many horrible aspects to the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh, that are just, and that's so deeply anthropomorphic, and you know, it's a crazy idea of a God that is obviously very parochial and set in the context in which it develops. And Jesus is so different, so I can see that. But then, if you believe that Jesus represents in some way some still omnipotent deity, then how would that omnipotent deity still allow that demiurge, that kind of like wicked Old Testament God to exist and do all those things? It's all just the theology and the philosophy.
I didn't want to get us like sidetracking too much.
But
you being
right.
a philosopher, you know. But
yeah, but you're absolutely right. So how much was Paul a precursor to Marcionism? How much was Paul maybe had elements of like understanding that he needed to move away from the Jewish roots of the Hebrew Bible? Yeah, it's a really interesting question.
It just makes me think, in the resurrection discussion, that wasn't the point of that video clip. Wow, thank you, honey. But in the vein of resurrection, it makes me kind of go, okay, he seems to be saying this body needs to end. There's a dichotomy here. Good, evil, flesh, spirit. You know, there's two kinds of bodies like you talk about. Well, are there two kinds of gods? The God of this world he mentions. He talks about this God of this world, and then there's the true God. It just makes me wonder how close he is to this idea that Marcion's picking up on. And thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really plausible, really interesting. Yeah, and you then see the early church fathers, you know, as I said, really reacting against this, where they're saying that the flesh is not dishonorable, not disgusting, not unworthy of restoration, but that it is fundamentally good, and that it would be evil for God to destroy what he thought good to create in the first place. So that's what the early church fathers are saying. But Paul says nothing remotely like this. Right, he's completely against what the early church fathers are saying, and there's no way that you can read, you know, all the quotes that we've had from Paul today and think anything other than that. It's just he's obviously completely opposed to what, say, Justin Martyr was claiming.
So I want everyone to know, in your book, by the way, just plugging it again over and over, I plug it, you know, letting people see it. These bullet points that go through, Richard Carrier makes this list of these arguments, and we've been addressing them as we go.
Yeah.
I just want to point that out on page 224 of the book.
I make the list of Richard Carrier's arguments because he's got 126 pages of it, and I'm trying to let's condense this argument down into bullet points. So I like
how he makes the case for both historicity and mythicism and how this would work for both. I like how he does that and says it still works in both cases. Yeah. This is the one I take, and here's why. But the point is, in this one bullet point I put a star next to, when I read something, I'll put a little star next to it and let myself remember. The early church fathers argued at great length that the flesh.
That's what I've just read from. The next part I literally just read from that. So you might be repeating what I said.
I might be, but he quotes Romans 7:18. And the point is, Richard's not just saying this. He's Paul is saying the opposite of what the early church is, not like a step away, the exact opposite of what the early church argues Paul is saying in Romans 7:18. So what is going on? Paul says, eat meat strangled to idols, no problem. As long as the weaker brethren don't know and you're not causing them to stumble, go for it, because demons are nothing. They have no power over you. Your God will protect you. Don't worry about it. And then in the book of Acts, it says, do not eat meat strangled to idols. Do not do it at all. There's not a prerequisite. There's no only under these conditions. No, it's don't do it. And Paul says, do it. What are they doing to Paul? it seems like they're co-opting him. They're somehow saying, I like this, but I don't like that.
Yeah.
Or he had such an impact that they're trying to pull their movement in. Like Dr. Bob talks about, Marcionites became so popular. Marcionism was so popular and widespread that the churches like Tertullian and these early guys are trying to co-opt and tame the flame of Marcionism by making this movement come and become under the umbrella of Orthodox. How do you do that? We got to have John the Baptist followers. Let's make John the Baptist cool with Jesus. We got to have these Pauline followers, these Marcionites. Well, we need Paul in our canon. And sure enough, that Marcion's canon was 10 letters of Paul and a proto-Luke. We don't know much more than that, but it just, you know what I mean?
And it gets better. This is a perfect segue. It gets better because what would you do if you're an early Christian church and you think, early Christian, I don't know, sect, organization, early Christians, right? Around the time of Justin Martyr, maybe a little bit before, whatever. And you're like, okay, Paul said some stuff that's really a bit awkward. How do we sort this out? Right, we can try and like argue, okay, well, the Gospels, okay, the Gospels can come along and they'll counter-argue that. How can we sort out Paul, though? Paul still says these things. What do? We forge a letter from Paul.
Mm-hmm.
We forge a letter from Paul to set right what he said in his first two letters to the Corinthians. So what happens? There's a forged letter that turns up called the third epistle to Corinthians. Right, third letter to Corinthians, which what does it say? It basically goes against what Paul has said in the previous two letters, and it's just thoroughly controversial. I mean, I could read it out, but he basically talks about how the body is fine. He goes completely against it. I mean, you can find the third epistle online variously, but towards the end, sort of verse 12 onwards, verse 24 onwards, talks about how wonderful the body is. And it's like, okay, so Paul's written this. That would be weird that he's completely disagreeing with himself, but maybe he's setting himself right. He's seen the light and put, oh no, it's a forgery.
But
okay.
that opens up such a problem. Imagine that's true. Paul does change his mind, it seems. Even Steve Mason thinks he's kind of developed his ideas a little further, and he may not, toward the ends of his life, think he may not see the return of Jesus toward the end. Maybe. But he thinks it's going to happen any moment now. He just may not see it in his own lifetime, which is typical, right? That's a human thing. But can you imagine if he did change his mind? We today looking at that. Imagine if a Christian accepted 3 Corinthians, and there was a letter we don't have that Paul did write that we really know that he wrote that we don't have. But anyway, let's just pretend this is it, and he changed his mind to physical body. Your whole premise earlier like makes no sense that this is just a spiritual body, and now you're like, well, okay, that thing that he's been appearing to me, this whole time I thought it was spiritual only. No, it's physical now. That would make no sense. So it's very convoluted. It makes no sense at all. Something else that brought to attention that makes that Paul looks funny. Not only do you write forgeries, you write narratives, Acts of the Apostles. It's just really Acts of Paul, pretty much, is what it is. It makes Paul the hero, but it also makes Paul and Peter so similar. Whereas, like in Galatians, Peter was to the circumcised, Paul was to the uncircumcised. What do you do in Acts? You send Peter to the uncircumcised, Cornelius, and you have Paul addressing circumcised people. They flip-flop. It literally is trying to harmonize Peter and Paul to the point where Paul finally shows up to James at the temple, and James is going, listen, we've heard that you're even telling Jews not to keep the law anymore. All right, we need to fix this. Will you go ahead and donate some money and get these 4 people this Nazarite vow to shave their heads and whatnot? And never does Paul respond. It's just the author has James say, we know you didn't do this. And they're already trying to fix this problem. Then you have 2 Peter saying, Peter, as if Peter really wrote it, which is a forgery. Even Eusebius said this was not written by Peter. So Christians, you might want to listen to your church fathers. Anyway, Eusebius says this is a forgery by Peter, and Peter's saying, we know that Paul's hard to understand. Like, he's already making excuses why Paul is difficult to understand, but don't worry, he's my pal. It's a bunch of baloney to fix the problem. That's my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And as one of your videos said, this is which was one of the video that was talking about how Paul reverses the idea of Adam, which is Adam is from the dirt, and then one of the videos you just played. That's my MS brain. So Paul, throughout his writing, seems to be very clear in saying that we live and die as Adam, made of dirt and sharing in his nature and fate. However, in resurrection, we are made of a different material, the heavenly spirit, and the nature and fate that we have is shared with Jesus. The flesh and blood and bones of our bodily existence are perishable and cannot enter heaven, and so have no place in any resurrection. So this goes back to what you read in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 45 onwards, which is exactly what one of your guests said earlier. So also it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living soul. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. However, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, then the spiritual. The first man is from the earthy. The second man is from heaven. And as is the earthy, so also are those who are earthy, and as is the heavenly, so also are those who are heavenly. Just as we have borne the image of the earthy, we will also bear the image of the heavenly. So it's switching this idea of the original Adam with Jesus, and the idea that this is just so different to what the Gospels, as we keep saying, and the early church fathers are saying. It's just at opposite ends of the theological spectrum.
If anything, by now, I think anyone watching this, if you're really an open-minded person, and I just say that this is an honest fact. I mean, watch this whole series. If you're an open-minded person, you'd at least be not dogmatic and say, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm not so sure. But the thing is, I don't think it's about open mind. I think it's their experience, and that experience is what weighs them down to hold on to these ideas. And no matter what you say, if you're not their pastor standing behind a pulpit, if you're not their local priest or friendly spiritual buddy or whatever, they're not going to listen to you. If they know that you don't believe, they're not going to listen to you. It doesn't matter what evidence you present to them. It doesn't matter what contradictions. They will find a way, cognitive dissonance, to do that. Oftentimes, that's my experience. But if you are open-minded, if you are really looking to try and figure this out, the more you find out about this, the more you don't trust what you've been told, and the more you realize, wow, we're missing a lot of evidence and a lot of data that we should have, and the evidence we do have is not very good on what I've been told at my local church. I shouldn't be so dogmatic at all. Let me lower my confidence in this whole thing. And then you get people that are Christians who are more liberal about it. They say, well, I just choose to believe. They're not so dogmatic. And I said, well, why are you even a Christian? You just admitted, like, for example, I'm not going to mention the name, but they said that Jesus didn't come when he said he was going to come. And yet they believe in Jesus. And I'm like, Jesus is God, according to you. This is Orthodox Christianity, and God got it wrong. And they're like, well, I just choose Christianity because I like the community. I like the walking into church. I like the ideas. It's not about it being literally true. And to me, I'm like, do you need all of that, in order to enjoy your life and to live life? Because I feel like we can create communities outside of the church and 100%. Start doing that. We need to do that better, I think, as skeptics. But anyway.
And it goes on to another question, but that's things like the Sunday Assembly. I really see the value in that, which is coalescing around an idea, shared experiences and shared beliefs about existence, and celebrating that, and singing together or enjoying each other's company in a weekly service or whatever. I think that has huge amounts of value, and that kind of the community and social cohesion is what keeps Christianity together in so many places. And therefore, if you're going to fight that or replace that, you still need to have that need for social bonding and social and community. Definitely.
What if we went back to the time of Paul and we were able to record this? And Paul's walking into the local synagogue and house churches of people who don't agree with him, and we watched the biggest arguments ever happening. I mean, you're just like, this is what Christianity started out as? And I mean, there are people,
they're arguing about cutting the end of their penises off.
Cut the whole thing off, Galatians 5. Just cut the whole thing off. Paul's pissed. Paul's sick of it. He's tired. He's tired of dealing with these people who are saying you need to obey the Torah. You need to stop telling my friends to circumcise. Next time, tell them to cut the whole thing off. Oh, man.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So I got a super chat here, by the way.
Did
you want to address this first?
Yeah, go for it.
Jake 40, thank you for the super chat. What is your view on Galatians 1:19? Is James necessarily the blood brother of Jesus, or could it be spiritual like brothers and sisters in Christ? There's multiple ways to answer this, and it's not just those two. Even Dr. Bob thinks that James is a pillar figure in some sort of this movement, whatever. I personally, I'm okay with saying it's his brother. I'm also okay with it possibly not being that way. I'm not dogmatic either way you want to go with it, but for me,
you've basically just answered how I'd answer that in exactly the same way, which is like, I think both are plausible. I mean, both are possible, and both have plausibility. I don't know what is more probable. But yeah.
I lean that it's probably his actual brother. I mean, I don't know that. Don't pin me down. I'm not that kind of guy. There are historicists that are dogmatic, so I'm not that. Like, I eat the wrong piece of pizza and I'm already thinking that he didn't exist at all, and then I'm like, oh, hold on.
I find it problematic. Where I find it problematic is where his family don't really exist in his ministry particularly. In fact, he goes to his hometown and he can't do miracles, and this is the idea that Jesus' family don't really believe in him. Do you know what?
Yeah.
And it depends how you think the gospel authors saw Jesus. But in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where I think they think he's a Messiah, do his family think he's a Messiah? Arguably not. And then suddenly he dies, and James is there going, "Yeah, I'm the brother." And how is that more likely that he was a real brother or a brother in arms? Maybe marginally brother in arms. I don't know, but I'm whatever. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, it just depends on the eye of the beholder. I said this online. David Fitzgerald and me were talking back and forth, and he's like, "Okay, I can dig the spirit," because I was a full-on mythicist, and this was something that hinged, if it was a brother and it's claiming this was an actual brother, what are you going to do next to remain a mythicist? Are you going to suggest he's a celestial heavenly brother? Or are you going to suggest Jesus is a composite figure who never really existed, and therefore Paul's also epistolary fiction? So now you have to say Paul's letters aren't actual letters. They're actually fiction. So every book in the New Testament is now all of a sudden fiction. So now we're not even... What are we talking about? You start to get into that. And Dr. Price, who's the most critical even of Paul's letters, he's still a modern day Dutch radical. He still thinks Paul's letters are still fragmentary. There's elements of a possible, Pauline idea, even though they've been tampered with by later church followers, messing with Paul's and kind of stitching Paul's ideas together, constantly interpolating things in there and stuff. But he still thinks there's a Paul. You wouldn't use the name Paul and forge letters in the name of Paul if he didn't have some impact and influence out the gate. He's probably some guy who had an initial impact.
You can't argue with the fact that or the notion that there are people delivering content in geographical areas, right? 200 years later, it doesn't spring out of nothing, right? And the Gospels don't spring out of nothing. These are, somebody is spreading ideas, but not somebody. Many people have to be spreading these ideas. So, I think you have to have real people. You clearly have real people doing these things.
Yeah.
And therefore one of them is called Paul.
I think that if there's anything we can know, that Paul's like one of the biggest in the New Testament. That's a clear one we should know. One can argue that the Gospels kind of inflated and created characters, created disciples, all of this stuff. Sure. Yeah. Nobody's denying that. Even historians are accepting this. It's not an issue. It's like, come on. I dealt with this the other day, and someone was saying how ridiculous I am for thinking Paul existed. And it's like, at this point, there's nobody out there, not even the most fringe, according to Orthodox, actual academic scholars. Like Bart Ehrman sees Robert Price and knows he's a serious scholar. He also says, yeah, but he's not teaching in academia, but he is a serious scholar to Bart Ehrman. And he's like, he would not say that Paul did not exist, that there wasn't a guy there. And he does things that you would go, Bob, you're really out, like guessing and throwing out ideas there. Is Paul Simon Magus, or Simon Magus Paul? Is there some, he does things like that, but he's still thinking there's a real guy here, that it's not all completely made up. So anyway.
Yeah. What I wanted to say, I want to bring in Luke 24:39. To me, this is just really obvious contradiction. So this is Paul versus Luke, and how these two authors here are very clearly diametrically opposed. So Luke 24:39 says, "See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." That's really interesting. So a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones like I have.
Yeah.
Okay. So this flatly and explicitly contradicts Paul's claims that our raised bodies are glorious, indestructible, and not made of flesh, and, as mentioned, cannot eat food. As 1 Corinthians 6 states, food is for the stomach and the stomach is for food, but God will do away with both of them. Yet the body is not for immortality, but for the Lord, and the Lord is for the body. So these two ideas, and Luke has Jesus eating, these are so obviously opposed in their idea.
That,
so it goes,
you wonderfully spell that out in this chapter. And catch that power of what he said there again when he says, look, see me, feel me, touch me. Look, I mean, he's eaten the whole nine. Spirits don't do this. They can't do this. And and Paul explicitly says, flesh and blood does not inherit the kingdom of heaven. And that Jesus is he's spiritually resurrected.
You cannot get two more obvious contradictions, two more obviously different approaches to resurrection. I mean, it's so obvious to me, and I think you have to just gerrymander your brain in order to tie yourself in knots to harmonize these. It's so obvious.
100%. Couple super chats, and then on page 227, as we're wrapping things up.
Yeah, that's a nice.
We've got it. Well,
summary,
a couple things I'll read, if that's okay, out of your book. I want everybody to go get the book. Doc Pleroma, thank you so much for the super chat. What about pre-existent Jesus as angel in the Philippians hymn in 2:6-11? A pre-Pauline prose the Philippians may have already been familiar with. Yeah, I mean, I'm not closed off to there being it already. Paul doesn't. I don't think Paul's the first guy in the movement at all. I think there's already an existing movement, and Paul is saying he persecuted it prior to being a convert to it. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's something of this already happening. I think if that's your question.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely pre-Pauline. Was I talking about this in the last video or on my blog? I can't remember. But yeah, there's pre-Pauline content, isn't there? That because Paul isn't just inventing everything. It's this idea that people get their ideas from somewhere. So he's getting his ideas from somewhere. Who are they? Who are these people? We don't really know, but are they eyewitnesses to Jesus? Possibly some of them, in what Paul says, and he knows Peter, and etc. etc.
Just to give people who want to capitalize on. No, he got it all from a vision, because Galatians says, in this, there's truth to that, but people are, I think, ignoring why is Paul heading to Jerusalem? Think about this for a second. If you think he got everything and created everything from his vision, he wouldn't need to go to James and Cephas to get approval for anything. For what? He started the movement. He wouldn't need approval from anyone if he, wasn't heading there to try and get the stamp of approval, which his whole argument is. They gave me the stamp. And then I had to confront Peter to his face. This huge Jerry Springer match happens between Paul and Peter, or Cephas, if you will. So you wouldn't need to go to them to say, hey, are you okay with me preaching this? If you were the guy who started the whole movement, you wouldn't need to run over here and say, I'll give you money and feed just remember the poor. That's not something you would do. However, his gospel, maybe his ideas about the gospel come from his vision or whatever his experience.
Yeah, so Paul talks a lot about where he gets his content from, and he talks a lot about scriptures and a lot about revelations from God directly, and rather than from actual people. So he goes to those two, and that's pretty problematic as far as I'm concerned, because personal revelations aren't that's a dubious form of epistemology as far as I'm concerned. And scriptures, I don't think have much force either, as far as, you know, making claims about Jesus. So I think yeah, it's difficult because there's so much inference. I mean, goodness me, doing any kind of exegesis on the New Testament is massively about inference, and you are making guesses. You can't get away from the fact that, and so it's interesting, some of the apologists will say this is what happened, and they're so sure, like we saw that initial clip at the beginning of this video that you played about the 1 minute apologist, Norman Geisler, you know, a huge name in the business, literally the business, making these massively confident claims about this is how it is. But actually, so much is built on inference. So much is built on trying to join the dots and making guesses about what's going on. And you get questions like this: what about the pre-existence or Jesus as angel in the Philippians hymn? Well, yeah, well, let's think about that, and let's do some evaluation and exegesis. And it's going to be theorizing. It's going to be joining the dots. It's going to be making inferences. And that's what theology is. And yet you've got the idea that the New Testament is inerrant and all this. I don't know. The whole. Sometimes I just want to throw all my books up in the air and just go, it's all nonsense. What are you doing? This is just like, come on.
I don't think you would spend as much time as you do on it if it wasn't so much of an impact on society. I mean, we see this is what motivates me when I see people light up and write me, like I just had on my Patreon. Someone just joined the Patreon recently. He said that, and I won't mention their names, but him and his wife, they said, thank you. I cannot tell you what MythVision has done for me. You have helped me slowly deconvert while I even watched you. You were patient. You know, you might make your jabs here and there, but like I went from hardcore fundamentalist. Then I started to kind of become like an esoteric, same journey I took, like a soft, gradual decline to naturalism. And he said, I'm okay with the term atheist. My wife's not okay with the term. I'm like, that sounds like me and my wife. My wife is not an atheist. Okay. I'm totally cool with the term because I know what it means, but people have baggage attached to these things. So this is why I do it, because it's actually affecting people today.
It's like calling yourself a socialist in America. It's like, that's public suicide. You know, no one calls themselves a socialist. I mean, it's starting to become a little bit different now, but there are certain terms, and atheists, you know, like the polls that have been done in the past, which is who would you trust more, or who would you like as a president more? And atheists just come out of the bottom of all the polls, like consistently. You know, it comes below like mass murdering paedophile or something. It's like, we'd rather have one of those. No, I'm obviously joking, but or am I? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's like atheist is just a term in America that confers just such visceral negativity, whereas in Britain it's just like meh, whatever.
Yeah. Couple more super chats here. Topic discussed. My friend Gary, go subscribe to Gary's YouTube channel. They talk about everything under the sun, and it's not just religious stuff. Like they get into you name it, and they're talking about it. If it's a hot topic, he's going to want to talk about it. And so he has a question. If 1 Thessalonians and 1 Corinthians were Paul's first writings, was he trying to help his followers understand why Jesus had not returned yet? Was he also trying to help them understand what happens after they die?
Yeah, and this is a really good question. I think it comes on to this idea, and you sort of mentioned as Paul changed his mind. Is there variety in what Paul says? I mean, he seems very sure in what we've read already of Paul about this two-body hypothesis. But then, this is me perhaps counter-arguing against myself, but it's not. I just think Paul is playing with ideas maybe and trying to understand his own theology. You know, these are expressions of his own thoughts, right? These letters. Well, in 2 Corinthians 12, we have a lack of clarity. So we've gone, I think, from a very certain certitude in what you've read today of Paul. And now, as I say, 2 Corinthians 12, boasting is necessary, says Paul, though it is not profitable. But I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know, or out of the body I do not know, God knows, such a man was caught up to the third heaven and I know how such a man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, God knows, was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words which a man is not permitted to speak. So you've got this kind of rather confused idea of like, well, was it in the body? Was it not in the body? So do you know what I mean? I think there's an interesting idea that you know, he's trying to help his followers understand. I mean, that's the notion of what First Corinthians is, and is this dialogue with people in Corinth who don't quite agree with what he is trying to say, and so he is trying to help them understand. But then that might change over time as things develop in his own sect and in his own community and as his own ideas develop. I mean, but I think what people fail to do often as Christians maybe is see that these documents of both the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, as kind of living documents, and by that I mean documents that represent real people writing real ideas who might not actually be representing what God believes, but what they think God is, right, or God believes, or whatever. And so these are real human documents where they are struggling with ideas. You can go back to Ecclesiastes, you can go back to, you know, Book of Job in the Hebrew Bible, and this is like wrangling with theological ideas and the authors expressing like arguments for and against certain positions and this and that. And in the New Testament, you've got Paul, you know, wrangling with these ideas, wrangling with other people, and yet the modern Christian goes back and says this is all inherently true and infallible. And it's like, no, these are documents where people are trying to understand their beliefs and trying to wrangle with theology.
That's why Dr. Price gets really upset about it. Now he knows why people do it, but he's like, no, if anything, he said, I am a real apologist. And what he means is, I want to defend what the text actually is saying and what it's actually meant by the author's initial thing. So when there's a contradiction, he said, I glorify it. It's a revelation. The reason Luke said this instead of that, though he used this text, he had a different intention. And when you go through all that, man, it's a really whole different way of looking at the Bible.
That's what we've been trying to say all these videos, mate, is that what, so if Luke says something different to Mark, what is Luke trying to say? Don't try and harmonize.
Mark meant the same thing, but a little different perception. And it was just like, no, like Luke may be like saying, hey, as he does at the beginning, my gospel is the most accurate one. I'm going to go ahead and take a poo-poo on these others and let you know why this is the real true gospel. And like, whoa, you know, I couldn't imagine that as a Christian. But the other thing you mentioned, Gary mentioned, a topic to discuss, 1 Thessalonians. Steve Mason, other scholars I've talked to, they think that Paul's dealing with problems. Every letter he's doing is pretty much either a problem, most of them. Others might be praise, like he's thanking the Philippians. You guys were awesome, man. You know, keep up the good work. But in Thessalonians, or the Thessalonica church, they had a problem with their family members that are dying. Like over and over, there's people dying, and they're going, what's going on here? Why are people dying? And this is where, when I brought up James Tabor, he believed from his 30, 40 years in Paul, he says Paul has a cosmic transformation idea that everything's going to change. Like this world's going to end and everything will be transformed. This is the idea that he thinks Paul is talking about happening. The people that are dying, Paul's trying to say, listen, don't worry. The dead in Christ will rise first. And we who are alive and remain at his coming will be taken to meet the Lord in the air. Okay. This whole idea is where I think the dilemma would come. Someone who thinks this is physical could easily read that into this and try and pull that out. Someone who doesn't think this is physical could still find a way to make this make sense. But the problem is the Lord hadn't come yet. The return of Christ and the transformation that was expected hadn't happened. Full preterists will say it did. It was the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem, and somehow that's the end. I have a hard time accepting. But yes, I think that this is addressed in 1 Thessalonians. He's already trying to deal with people who are saying, my cousin, my aunt, they're dead. What do we do about it? No, that's okay, Paul said. He comes up with this idea. The first in Christ, the first that are dead, well, they'll be the first to go. They're the first fruits. You know, they'll be part of the first ones to go when the Lord returns. So just wanted to address that. And then one more super chat. I don't want to butcher your name. I think it's Lee or Lay. I'm not 100%. Lay?
Lee. I'd say that's Lee.
Okay. Thank you so much for the super chat. Huge thank you to Derek and all guests from a recovering evangelical. Purchased many of the books and actually read them all. Changed my life. The freedom from religion is amazing. Please keep up the great work. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. I literally, this is what I want people to experience it, because they don't know that there's life outside. They don't realize that it's so much more peaceful. The only thing is, there are the thoughts of like, man, I wish when I died that wasn't it, but that's a human thing. I think that's why these stories came up to begin with. What do you think, Jonathan? The reason why we created myths of creation and why someone ate a fruit and now we all die, like, it's explaining why we die, and hopefully,
yeah. So it's attribution. It's attributing explanation to things. It's a form of etiology. So etiological stories are stories that explain certain phenomena. You get that in the Bible heaps. We talked about this a little bit before, I think, or maybe I did it with Neil. But Gnostic informant, where you have the pillar. There's Lot's wife, Sodom and Gomorrah, where there's a pillar of rocky salt somewhere near the Dead Sea. How do we explain that? Well, that's where God struck her down, or turned her into a pillar of salt. So that explains that, and explains why the Dead Sea is so salty, so on and so forth. So what people have done in all places and in all ages is try and explain phenomena in terms of, well, just try and explain phenomena, and you write them into your mythology, and it becomes part of your cultural heritage. Whether it be Ayers Rock or Uluru in Australia, whether it be whatever, there are stories that develop to explain everything, and there are certain stories in the Bible that are there to explain stuff, including creation stories. The creation story of the Bible is no different from any other creation story on earth that Christians and Jews would happily call myth. Right, but when it comes to their own, there's this biblical exceptionalism that is just double standards. It's special pleading, and especially when you have elements of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, when you have a talking serpent, when you have ribs, when you have the Garden of Eden, when you have all those elements in ancient Near Eastern comparative mythology. And yet you say, no, but our one is true. Those ones that pre-existed our one, they're not true. And our one wasn't drawing on that one because we're exceptional. And our Bible is definitely on its own, sitting there, and it just came out of nothing. And because it's true, it's literally true. It's like, oh, come on, man. But you're happy. Everyone's happy to look at all these other cultures and see all of these stories that explain phenomena. And they say, yeah, that's all mythology. But my one ain't mythology.
Yeah, it's sad to constantly deal with that. Lee, thank you so much for the super chat. I hope you continue. Don't give up. Some people go into philosophy, as you know, a tippling philosopher. But no, it's a freedom that I wish everybody got to experience. Making it out, not having to constantly worry about this or that. Am I doing this? It's like someone says, don't eat that cookie over there, that warm chocolate chip melted. Just don't eat it. And you're always thinking about that chocolate chip, like, don't eat it. Well, that's the same thing with a lot of what we see in the Bible. Don't do this, don't do that. You obsess over things, then you're beating yourself up, wondering why you're fantasizing about things you aren't allowed to do. Finally, there's this freedom, right? When it's like, you could, if you wanted to, and you don't beat yourself up over it, you don't even desire it. It's like, okay, this isn't even a thing where I'm like wanting to chase these ideas or do something I shouldn't do. I'm cool. And in fact, me not doing drugs anymore, I actually attribute that to my being critical and skeptical and coming to this kind of worldview. It's helped me. I really believe this has helped me to get off drugs and to not need to go back to drugs. I was constantly looking for my Jesus fix, and now I don't need it. So,
oh, that's beautiful. That's really good.
One more, man. One more popped up on me.
You go for it.
Are you saying that Thessalonian followers of Paul believed they would live to see Jesus return? So when they started dying and know Jesus, they were like, what the? Yes, this is exactly what I think's happening. Steve Mason thinks this is happening. And he's the same guy I was playing the clip earlier who said, Paul said flesh and blood does not inherit the kingdom. It is a spiritual resurrection, not a flesh and blood resurrection, which means, like Norman Geisler said earlier in the video, it cannot be the same body. You can do that with the Gospels, but you cannot. You are making a convoluted argument to assume this is Paul and what Paul's actually thinking, or you're putting words into Paul's mouth that aren't there. So the Thessalonians, because Paul's entire canon, his whole corpus is, it's about to happen. It is the last hour. This is about to take place any moment now. Jesus is coming back. He's going to change the whole thing. In fact, you see this even in Acts 17, in later writings in the mouth of Paul by Acts, the author of Luke, whoever the author really was, we don't know, where he has Paul say to these Athenians and Epicureans in the middle of Rome, over 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem. And he's saying, look, the world's about to be judged and God's not far from each one of you. Like, he's trying to convince them, like, get ready. So this whole thing permeates. They expected him to come, but they also were probably thinking none of us were going to die. We were all going to be alive when he returns. How come Uncle Bob and Aunt Sally and Susie Joe over here, whatever, a bunch of names, why are they dying? I thought Jesus is coming back.
I think as skeptics, we've almost become a little bit normalized to terms like failed apocalyptic prophet, that we go, yeah, Jesus is that, yeah, whatever. But Jesus, like, this is really what's going on here. Jesus was a failed apocalyptic prophet. Jesus came along and said, this is going to happen. It didn't happen. And then the gospel writers had to progressively pick up the pieces to that failed eschatological, framework or set of claims. And it's just disappointment after disappointment that then have to be explained away. That's what Jesus was. Jesus said stuff that didn't happen, and then it's had to be progressively, theologized in order to harmonize it with reality.
Yeah.
And we kind of forget that we kind of just go along with the Christian thesis, which is, it's going to happen and this generation doesn't mean that. And it's like, yeah, whatever. Okay. No, this guy got it wrong. This guy cocked up like the core claims that he's making. And I'm sorry, Christian, really, I shouldn't let that go. We kind of let it go too much, but I think Bart Ehrman's quite big on the failed apocalyptic prophet, and a lot of skeptical scholars are, but we should really be hammering that home. Like that's a real core component of skepticism over the Jesus claims.
Yeah, we've gotten used to it. I used to not even pay attention to it, and I wish more people would, but it's interesting. The whole thing is interesting. That's why I love doing it too. It's not only an impact in the world, but it's now I'm playing with the toys in a different way. I don't worship them. I'm like, okay, hold on. I never knew that. I used to see this way. How could I be so blind? And my friend Gary super chatted again. Thank you so much, man. Seriously.
No need to apologize.
I really appreciate your help. I cannot tell you how much this is helping. Thank you so much. This month has actually been worse than most months. YouTube fluctuates, and so does my Patreon. Like every month, people drop off. It's hard to keep people coming in so that we can keep the thing growing, to keep doing what we're doing. So thank you so much for all the help. He says, sorry for the super chats. Never apologize again, Gary, for super chatting or anyone. Never. I don't care. But why was Paul's original canon so focused on the return of Jesus? Why was that an important part of his gospel? What was going to happen upon his return according to Paul's earliest teachings?
Well, that first part of that question is just what we've been talking about, which is like, why wouldn't he be? I mean, this is the most important thing that's going to happen. Sure, just imagine you're Paul. Imagine you're the earliest followers, right? You are dead excited about a second coming of the Messiah, of Jesus, or however whatever you believe Jesus was. Like, this is, or it's all going to happen, or the general resurrection, or whatever your your interpretation of the big thing is going to happen, and it doesn't happen. So that's got to be like, you know, if it's like Harold. Was it Harold Camping or Harold Camp or whatever his name is? You know, making those big claims. Like this is my big thing. It's going to happen now. Oh, it hasn't happened. Right. So your whole life is all about this. It's like, oh, okay. Well, so how do I justify those? You know, and it's of course this is what he's going to be, you know, concentrating on.
So this digs into a deeper question, Gary, that goes into, like we talked about, Paul didn't create this stuff. I mean, some of it, sure. I'm saying this is not whole cloth created by Paul. Paul's dealing with an earlier movement. If anyone looks like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran community, they were apocalyptic. Like they were the reason this soon end is the same reason today Christians are literally praying and going to church saying, please come back now. The injustice in this world, there's so much wrongdoing happening and so many things, and we deal with sicknesses and illnesses, and there's so many problems, right? The evil, argument of evil, like how do you deal with God in this argument? Well, don't worry. God's going to take care of that. This is the whole point. This is why they keep that card in their pocket. But they really believed any moment now. Harold Campin really believed any moment now. Why? Well, they make up all these scriptural reasons why. There's even a book, 88 Reasons Why Jesus Will Come Back in 1988. And they're talking about all these little things to try and say these are the evidences. Paul, it depends on who you read, what scholar. Paul of Fredrickson believes that Paul is, okay, so imagine you're Paul, you're dealing with Jewish synagogues in the diaspora, including those who are Jews inside of Jerusalem and in Israel, all right? And then all of a sudden, you go out to these diaspora synagogues where Paul probably was initially, and then sees these pagans, these non-Israelite Gentiles popping in and going, we want to follow this God. We're interested in your God. And they became what they called God-fearers. And Paul's reading his Hebrew Bible, probably the Septuagint, being a Greek speaker and reader, and sees in Isaiah where you will be a light to the nations, that in the end, not only would God call Israel back, the lost Israelites, or that Israel would come back to Israel, that he'd gather back his people, but that the nations would be drawn to the God of Israel. Now, I don't know how true this is, because we've been talking about Paul dichotomized against Yahweh, and I'm not sure. This is just one argument. But that Paul sees these Gentiles attracted to monotheism and the God of Israel, and he's saying, this must be the end. Now, that could be one explanation. The other is Jews had apocalyptic fever, period. That's the reason the Roman-Jewish war happened. These people said, all right, we start this war, Yahweh's coming with his angels, baby, and these Romans are going down. Of course, that's not.
Yeah, because the general resurrection for them is just the Jews, you know, but yeah, current.
Yeah, so there's no one knows certainly, but there's apocalyptic fever happening, and this seems to me clearly Paul thinks he's living in the last days, and so do fundamentalist Christians in North America right now. They've been thinking that for over 100 years, and they're still going to think it for another who knows how long, which is why MythVision exists. I want to educate people and make them realize, just so you know, your cult, your tribe of Christians have been doing this every single generation of every century for 2,000 years. When will you get it's not going to happen? Because it never happened, because let me show you the evidences and problems with what you're looking at and what you believe. I'm hoping that happens, but it's not a I'm smart thing. It's something else. And there's psychology involved. There's much more than, let me just give you the facts. That's my personal thing. Sorry for rambling, man.
No, that's good. So before you go on to that sort of summary bit, there's something I had forgotten to bring into account. So talking about the kind of different versions of the resurrection. So we've got a purely Gnostic version, a kind of Pauline two-body thesis, and we've got the gospel corporeal flesh and blood resuscitation kind of approach.
Yeah.
There's you've talked about the Nag Hammadi in Egypt findings. One of the famous textual discoveries took place in 1945 near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, often being called the Gnostic Gospels. The Coptic Apocalypse of Peter is of great interest in this context because it lays out exactly what we have been discussing in terms of what it seems Paul actually believed.
Yeah.
So here Peter is having a vision in the temple of something that isn't happening and didn't happen, which the real Jesus sitting next to him is explaining like some dream reality mental. It is therefore more like the strange symbolic content we find in the Book of Revelation. There are actually 3 Jesuses in the scene. The real one speaking, who is sitting next to Peter in the temple, and the 2 others that Peter sees in a vision, who are not real persons any more than the blanket that descends from the heaven in Peter's vision in Acts is a real blanket. In this vision, one of those symbolic vision Jesuses is depicted in the future crucified in a body of flesh, and the other is depicted as nearby watching, but as somehow also being the physical Jesus that was taken at his arrest, and thus not actually incorporeal. This is a symbolic vision, so none of what Peter is seeing is meant literally. And then I go on and quote what happens, but basically there are 2 Jesuses, and the Jesus being crucified, you know, you're thinking, oh, Jesus is dead, and you've got the other Jesus above laughing because it's like, that's not what's going on, right? So actually, I'll read from the Apocrypha of Peter. Actually, I will read. He whom they crucified us, the firstborn, and the home of demons, and the clay vessel in which they dwell, belonging to Elohim, and belonging to the cross that is under the law. So this is the idea that you've got the body belonging to Yahweh, maybe. But he who stands near him is the living savior, the primal part in him whom they seized, and he has been released. He stands joyfully looking at those who persecuted him. Therefore he laughs at their lack of perception. Indeed, therefore, the suffering one must remain, since the body is the substitute, but that which was released was my incorporeal body. So we've got this very obvious understanding of a 2-body, or arguably a 3-body, because you've got then another Jesus talking to Peter, but basically a 2-body thesis at least.
This makes me want to take Elaine Pagel's more seriously. I mean, like, just the Nag Hammadi library, like, what is early Christianity really looking like? By the way, my jaw dropped because my friend Gary just like blasted me with a super chat. I don't think I've ever had a super chat this big. It's huge. So I got to get it. I'm following the money tonight, man. I'm going the money. But by the way, they need to get the book. I mean, in that chapter specifically, I was going to read something on the page before.
Yeah,
where you go, this is wholly important because it shows, and you go through all of these bullet points. Just the order of things makes perfect sense. So real quick, let me get these super chats and go back up. I missed somebody's. X and Music said, why was Paul knighted while John and George weren't? Thank you so much for that super chat. I appreciate it. Oh, man.
Nice
we already know
reference.
the answer to that. Paul didn't like swords. Duh. I'm just kidding. Gary, man, blasted off with a monster super chat. You rock. Oh, thank you. Thank you. By the way, you've grown wings. You're going to heaven instantly. So Paul was truly apocalyptic and really wanted to believe, or did believe. I think he did. I think this guy was, I mean, you got Heaven's Gate cult, which is expecting aliens to come, and they were willing to take cyanide, and they believed it was going to happen. The guy, if he really is telling the truth that he was getting whipped and lashed at every synagogue, that he's out here getting persecuted and beat up, and I'm not talking about Acts, I'm talking about in Paul's letters, this guy was devout enough to go and be embarrassed and completely ridiculed and picked on for his beliefs. I think he believed. Now, some people think it was for the money, but we'll get there. But how much do we know about additional motivations of Paul? Which is where we're going, I think. Where can we look to find out if we expected to be paid by his followers, or if he expected to be paid by his followers? And how earlier in his gospel ministry was he asking for money? This permeates Paul through and through. So some people think Paul was in it all for the money. I'm not. I know Christian pastors who I really think are sincere and know that they need to have the money to keep the thing going. I think Paul really believes in his own nonsense.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the earlier question as well. As was Paul a narcissist? And I tried to bring into play. So I mean, what we look for is precedents. What we look at is other religious leaders of the ilk of Paul, right? And you see what are their personality types. I don't know. I maybe I need to go and look at this, but I would imagine you would need to be a certain sort of person that that would be the sort of person to do that. You know, it's not for everyone to be a religious leader and to be sort of arguably charismatic, or if you're not charismatic, maybe you're authoritarian or whatever. So you are leading people to believe a certain thing that you. So the question is, do you believe strongly in it? This is what you're saying, or is this? Do you want people to believe because this is a way of generating money or generating maybe psychological, satisfying psychological needs for you? That's narcissism, sociopathic sort of tendencies. Do you need, what is going on here? And we can only make inferences again. I mean, it's really hard to say. I think it's plausible that Paul could be any of those things. And then the question is there, well, how can we go about finding out more about what the answer might be?
I mean, it's clear, Paul, remember the poor, Paul said, and as long as I remember the poor. But I don't know, Gary, if you saw my interview with Steve Mason. He takes 4 hours with me, and 2 or 3 of those are specifically dealing with Paul's letters, and he has the visuals up and all. And he's saying Paul's really getting money out of these people. He's really trying to fund his operation in some way. And I don't know if we can ever really know what all his motives really were.
Because the question would then be, because it could be that he wants to fund that operation so that he can grow that operation, right? So it's plausible that Paul could either want money for himself, or it's plausible as well that he could want money in order to be able to expand the church and spread the good news in a genuine way. So how do we find out? I don't know that we can. And so you're just using inference, and maybe you're looking at other such leaders and saying, well, this leader did this, but then there's a leader that did that. I don't know.
Yeah, and you kind of wonder, did the money run out? I think someone said the money ran out for the Jews. Their operation wasn't selling. I mean, you're running out here. You're not going to get people to snip the head of their penis off. You're not going to get them to run around, do all these things. So they're running out of money. They're desperate. They hear this gospel by Paul. They stamp approval, and then they try to do damage control. This is just my personal thoughts. They're trying to do damage control when they see what Paul's doing and how he's convincing people of this particular gospel. And now they're going behind him, trying to go to the same audience and Judaize them. And here Paul is going, no, and he's addressing them, calling them super apostles in Corinthians. I don't care what the super apostles say. I got this directly from Christ. And now there's a split. I mean, he's making all this money, and he's been helping the Jerusalem church, but then the Jerusalem church is turned on him. I don't know. I mean,
there's politics. I mean, goodness me, you've been a member of different churches. I've been a member of different organizations, even work organizations. Politics is in everything. Power struggles. No matter what organization you're talking about, whether it's a Scouts net, a Scout Hut, or a charity thing, or some sports club that you're running. Politics. So people are psychological animals, and power and all the psychological needs we have play a part in how people operate. So this is definitely what's going to be happening here. What have you read?
Gary, you're killing me, bro. Oh, he gave me another super chat. Man, you guys are killing me. You're gonna have me red. My cheeks gonna be red. Y'all are crazy. Thank you so much, man. I hope that answered your question, dude. I'm having a blast. I hope you're okay, Jonathan. This is good.
I'm okay. I've got half a glass of wine left, so you're fine.
Good. Keep. Hold on. Let me pour some water in there, and I'll turn it into wine for you. So we'll be all right. Fire Sabers, thank you so much for the super chat. Where do you think Paul developed his theology in his writings? He claims to have a vision from Christ. Realistically, where do you think he learned of Christianity and adopted his theology? This is complex. You can ask certain people certain things, like, is he part of the mystery cults?
Yeah.
He's definitely a Hellenized Jew.
How much did he really persecute Christians? There's all sorts of, yeah.
And what is meant by that? Is it killing Christians, or is it like he's just turning them into their local police because they're having gatherings they shouldn't have, or
Yeah.
like, what is it? But where's he getting his ideas from? When we talk about visions, I don't think he's like everything's coming directly from visions. There's a worldview behind Paul's visions, I think. Paul's living in a Greco-Roman Jewish type culture where, I mean, it goes so far that you have like Josephus saying that Yahweh was another name for Zeus. I had Del C. Allison Jr. mention this. So there's so much, if I can use the term syncretism, I'm not sure if that's the correct word. There's so much blending of ideas from Platonic thought to how do we have Jewish and Greek ideas together? Where is he getting all this? Like, what is it?
So
really
the question is something like this: when he says he has visions, did he really have visions? So that's the first thing you got to ask: is how much do we trust Paul when he claims he has visions? Then, if you say, okay, if you accept he did have visions, what underwrites that? Is he genuinely having hallucinations and experiences? In which case, are these just a manifestation of pre-existing ideas that codify pre-existing ideas in his head? So therefore, he's going to have these ideas and he codifies them in having some experience, and he says, now this has come from God, it has to be right. So where is he getting those ideas from? In other words, like, as a skeptic, I obviously don't think he's going to have visions from God, and therefore these are actual revelations from God, where he's being delivered information that he didn't previously had. He's being delivered that information, and now he has it. He's basically learning from God in some kind of divine visionary hallucination and revelation. That's not what's happened. So as far as I'm concerned, he either had visions or he didn't, and if he had them, they are drawing from pre-existing ideas. So where do those ideas from? Well, it's what is the theological milieu in which he's set? So he's an ex-Jew that is creating this new sect that we could go back to talk about Enoch, the Book of Enoch. We could go back and talk about all the kind of sources that he's going to be drawing from. And then is he going to be developing these himself? Has he got people around him that they're developing? They're talking about this stuff. You know, you can. All of these things are plausible, and we there's no way of being able to say this is what happened. Yeah. All you can do is throw out a bunch of theories and say one of these is all of these are possible. Some of these are more plausible. On probability, you have to do a probability assessment of them. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. This is a great point, but all you can do is glean theories about things. Even in Acts, like Paul's out here at the Areopagus, however you want to pronounce it, in Athens. He's preaching this very blended Jewish/Greek message. He quotes Epimenides, a Greek poet, and Deuteronomy. And he doesn't like say it is written. He blends them. If this is a potential fossil of what Paul may have seemed like preaching like, he's mixing both ideas. So there's both worlds in one message, and here he is pitching it with saying, oh, but by the way, it's my God. It's not Zeus. It's the God of Israel, or my God, if you will.
Yeah, so no one operates in a vacuum, and Paul is not operating in a vacuum. He is generating these ideas by he is Hellenized. There is no doubt that he's going to be influenced by all sorts of different things, and that will help him to generate his theology for Jesus by taking what he knows about Jesus, which is probably very little compared to the Gospels, who generate an awful lot more narrative about Jesus. So he's playing with these ideas, and there you go.
I have to do this for Gary, and I did this. I popped this up. Everyone watching right now, this is Gary. This is Topic Discussed. This is my friend Gary, and he has a YouTube channel. Please go subscribe. I'm going to post this again in the chat. Like, I can't tell you how much help he has already helped tonight. Like, this is huge. So I just posted the actual link. Topic Discussed. You name it. Hormone. Look at the topics. Hormone therapy. Let's see. Utah Tech University. So he's talking to ex-Jehovah's Witness right here. Ketamine infusion. So Gary's a very intelligent guy. We've had a lot of off-camera discussions in the past. And I just want to thank him as a friend. I love you, Gary. I really do appreciate you helping out, man.
Calvinism, eternal life, Jerry Falwell Jr. You know, that's a lot. That's a wide range of topics. Yeah,
absolutely, man. There's all sorts of fun stuff. He gets into the science. He interviewed me one time right here, actually. Well, he did the Calvinism, and then, of course, my coming out of religion. So he's interviewed me as well. Go support my friend Gary. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. He had
all the best humans interview you. So if you want to check out a good couple of interviews of you, I've interviewed you as well.
That's right, you did. And yeah, we already knew that. We already knew you were the man. So I just figured I'd let Gary get a little spotlight there. You know?
No, but yeah, Gary. No, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to detract from Gary.
No. You're fine. I just
I ever will be. Yeah.
Let everybody know, though. Seriously, though, I appreciate you. And he says Paul reminds me of Joseph Smith. Bingo. I'm so on board with that. In that they both very well may have believed in their visions. And when they realized money and power was possible from followers, they gain additional motivations. But
really
does corruption follow the money? Perhaps eventually?
Yeah. I talk about Joseph Smith later. In fact, we'll talk about it in the next video. But there's some really interesting parallels between the Joseph Smith sort of movement and sort of revelations of. Yeah, but we'll come to that in the next video. But yeah, there's a really interesting parallel there with Paul, and I think it's a great observation that you can be in it for the right reasons, but then money comes along and corrupts, and then you're following it, but you're justifying following the money by throwing on some theology on top and good motivations, but really are you actually just following the money?
I don't know. They're like there's all speculation again, but I could see people saying that that's an added motivation, but it may not be the primary one. And part of me wonders if Paul likes the attention of being the guy who got it right. I mean, he'll constantly refer to himself as right, and I don't care what any authority, any super apostles say, I'm right. So he doesn't seem to like authority. And part of me kind of wonders, and I just say that, like, imagining there was a conversion that happened. I don't think he was at the top of the totem pole, okay? He probably wanted the attention. I don't know that. I mean, I'm psychoanalyzing, which is totally wrong. Yeah. I'm speculating here. But I wonder if he's not hacking it in whatever cult he's in. He wants to make an impact. And maybe
that goes back to that narcissist. Is he a narcissist? Is he a sociopath? Does he want to be the center of attention? Does he want that power? I think there's a really interesting parallel here with, because I always ask this question about televangelists. Your Joel Osteens and your what's his face? What's the name? Famous one with loads of jets.
Oh, the one that's like COVID gone.
Kenneth Copeland. Yeah. His nuts. But I always wonder. Are these guys secretly not believers? Because I can't square the circle. I can't see how they can really believe in Jesus and be so opulent and so disgracefully unchristian in everything else they do in their lives. But are they still? Do you know what is going on behind the scenes with these people? And the same with Paul. So there's a similarity there. Do you think they're throwing all this on and justifying? They're morphing their belief in Jesus to justify the money, but there's still this core belief in Jesus, but it's wrapped up with the power and the money? Or have they just thrown that away and it is about the power and the money and they're just fooling everyone because they're just justifying fooling everyone because they just want the power and the money? What's going on?
Yeah, and this gets Dr. Price, just to mention his hypothesis. He thinks that this story in Acts with Simon the magician who comes to buy the gift of the Holy Spirit. He wants the gift of Holy Spirit and he offers to pay for it. Notice he's offering to pay. I asked this of M. David Litwa. M. David Litwa still thinks Paul and Simon are two separate people. He does not conflate them, but I mentioned this to him. You'll have to watch the show that I have on Patreon as to why until it goes public. And I don't know when that'll happen, but that's the way of keeping me going, right? This my little like tug you into, join the Patreon. But he's trying to buy the Holy Spirit in Acts. And Peter is like, no, condemns him. Notice it's not Paul, it's Peter. It makes you wonder if this is some way of putting a different character in the picture instead of Paul, because Paul is paying the church. I'll remember the poor, I'll pay. And here you have someone trying to buy the gift of the Holy Spirit. Hey, I want into this. I'll even pay for it. Okay. And here's a little like jab saying, no. He's a magician named Simon, not Paul. Dr. Price thinks, and he's not certain of it, but he hypothesizes this might be Paul. And he sees a lot of money in Paul's letters. So Paul's talking about money all the time, and there's always something there. Who knows? You know what I mean? It's interesting to think about, though.
Yeah, no, really good question.
Thank you for subscribing, Melody. I got a couple more super chats. They keep coming in. Did you want to say something?
No, go.
It's just flowing in, dude. Topic discussed. Gary's back again. Says, when is the next video where you explore the Paul Joseph Smith connection you were referencing? I'd love to.
Well, it's not a connection to Paul specifically. It's a connection to the parallels of people who lie in terms of the revelation. So with Joseph Smith, you had a bunch of the close disciples who made a testimony and then reneged on their testimony later. And it's just a really interesting investigation into, was everyone telling the truth? Because here we've got a situation where you've got people who weren't telling the truth about who were the core believers of this particular movement. So could this be the case with Christianity? So it's not quite where you can you could bring Paul into it, but yeah, so it's not quite a Paul Joseph Smith connection, but I will talk a little bit about Joseph Smith.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to that. So we'll keep Gary in mind, and because he has a lot of background knowledge on Mormonism and Joseph Smith, and he's a huge fan. So Gary, you got my number, man. We'll be linking up soon for sure. Thank you for all these super chats tonight, for real, man. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me, and I just I'll let the wife know after this, and she'll just be like, "What?" Yeah, she'll be super happy to hear it. Thank you. I appreciate your help. And Chihuahua Tricks, welcome back to channel. We love having you come back. You too, Derek. I mean, I guess definitely Jonathan, but I guess I'm part of it. It's okay. Can you comment on 2 John? Jesus not returning in the flesh is the Antichrist. So I think this is jabbing docetics, the docetist. I think is it 2 John? Yeah, that's a later book. So I think depends on who you ask, because you can ask Dennis McDonald, he'll think it's early. 2 John.
Sorry, if you go and look into that. Sorry, because I'm just looking at my Joseph Smith thing in here, so I'm just being a bit sidebarred. So bear with.
So there's a couple different. Oh, it's 2 John 1:7. So let me just do 2 John Blue Bible.
If your friend from Discuss, is it Gary? Did you say Gary?
Gary.
So I talk about it if he gets my book, page 266 to 268. I talk about sort of Joseph Smith and stuff to do with visions giving religious authority. So sorry, I'm not ignoring this super chat, but just to go back to the Joseph Smith, the idea that this plays into the Paul idea is that you claim to have visions to give yourself authority, and this is what Joseph Smith did. Arguably, gives himself the authority.
Muhammad did the same thing, according to many people.
That authenticates your claims. So Paul's saying, "I've had revelations from God." It authenticates his claims. It's basically how the Hebrew Bible works, which is like, I've got this set of laws that I want to impart on you, so I'm going to just say they came from God. Yeah. The codification of moral laws is basically what the Bible does. It's just saying, here's a bunch of moral laws that we think you should follow. What's the best way of getting you to follow them? Saying that God said so. And if you don't believe and follow God's laws, then you're so that's how we do it. So it's about validation by divine codification. But sorry,
no, you're absolutely fine. I think there's a big parallel between Muhammad and Joseph Smith. I think we need to definitely tackle that. So just to bring the verse up for people here in verse 7, for many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. such a one is the deceiver and the antichrist. And Christian apologists will probably not try to make this about docetics because they don't want this to be that late. And they'll say, well, docetists are 2nd century, so we don't want 2nd John being late. Who knows? Maybe they are earlier. Maybe there were people right out the gate already claiming Jesus had not come in the flesh and that maybe he's purely spirit. I mean, we know that there was even arguments of the divinity of Jesus. Like, they couldn't agree on, was he just a man? Was he completely God? Was he just some form of a God? Did he have, like docetics have this faintly ghostly type example of Jesus where he wasn't really in the same flesh you would say you and I are in, or something to this effect. Have you ever looked at that in 2nd John?
No. I mean, obviously, the questions are who's the author of 2nd John, and then the problem is if you don't really know who's writing this. Well, I don't suppose that doesn't matter. Yeah, it does matter who's writing this, I suppose. As to what you might think of, for example, that's the difference between Paul writing the epistles and a forged letters. This is pseudepigraphy of the other letters, and it does change how you interpret these things because Paul has that greater sense of authority, doesn't he? And but anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. But I haven't looked too much into 2nd John.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all those super chats. I mean, obviously they light up on the screen, and that's what keeps us alive. So I apologize if we were taking off track, but I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who's helped.
But 2nd John, rejection of Gnosticism, arguably. But anyway, as we were talking about. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. You carry on.
No, I mean, I think you're right on the money that there's some version of a Christian sect. If they weren't, they wouldn't be antichrist. They're in the vein of Christ somehow, whether they're Christ or antichrist. They're proponents and enemies. See, the closest people to us can be our biggest enemies.
Yeah, Antichrist just is a manifestation of orthodoxy, isn't it? So it's just saying, it depends. We're going to go down a rabbit hole. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, really, it's really interesting to look at the commentaries on this and consider it. Recommendation: whenever we're looking at commentaries, look at everything, including what Christians have to say. Don't limit it to, only the skeptics. But if you aren't reading the skeptics, if you're not reading critical scholars who draw different views, you're not going to get a well-balanced understanding and looking at how nuanced and difficult this topic is, because at the end of the day, no one really knows. It's fragmentary evidence. It's data that comes later. We're dealing with so many things to try and figure out what's up. That's why you don't hear me go, Jesus did exist and I know it and I'm a historicist. And it's like, nah, I'm not that confident, man. I'm not a believer anymore. The only reason I personally would go to that confidence is if I had an experience that attached me to it. But also, I'm not educated enough. I wouldn't pretend to be as smart as someone like Bart Ehrman. However, I still think his confidence is he's too confident, in my opinion. That's my opinion. But
I think you get back to questions of I think it's really interesting when Christians disagree with fellow Christians, right? And they have theological arguments or exegetical arguments, and you get the popcorn and you just sit and watch and you think, wow, right, here they are properly disagreeing with each other, and this is supposed to be the best revelation. Because it has to be the best revelation, because if God is producing a revelation that is imperfect, then God is sanctioning something that's imperfect, and therefore God is not omni, right? I love talking about all this stuff, but thank you for the thanks, John. I think there's a real sort of meta conversation we can have about the revelation that is the Bible, that when Christian apologists and exegetes disagree, you are admitting that this is a poor revelation. And if you're admitting that this is a poor revelation, then what is God doing using this as a primary source of disseminating ideas and revelation? It's just the Bible is so difficult to get a single coherent consensus opinion on, from the beginning of Genesis, to the end of the New Testament. It's obviously a book written by a bunch of different people over time, and it's very human, and it's not a particularly good divine revelation. And if it's not a good divine revelation, what's going on there? How is God sanctioning that?
Yeah, and just to address, I don't know if Dright Life, I don't know if you're talking about me or you're talking about him, or if you're talking, I don't know what you're talking about, but if I were interpreting this correctly, so his opinion is no better than any other. If he is addressing me, then why believe him? I'm not asking anyone to believe me. In fact, I want everyone to go do the work and look at it. When someone stands behind a pulpit and tells you they know, and they tell you this is the story, this is how it is, and there's 40,000 other denominations saying they know, and they don't agree, and there are contradictions, we should not trust anyone to know. We should investigate, use the brains we have, consider figuring out how to use critical thinking. I don't care if it's leading experts like Bart Ehrman or expert scholars like Robert M. Price. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your credentials are. Any of that, you should investigate it. And if something seems to make sense and it seems plausible, then I would go down that path and consider that evidence. Understanding we don't have empirical data to really deal with. We're dealing with very highly theological text, which with various discrepancies and contradictions and issues. So this is why I say what I say. Anyway.
And you can apply that question. So, why believe Paul? So why is Paul's opinion better than anyone else's about Christianity? And then you start having to make assertions about how the canon of the Bible is somehow divine. You start bringing it's just a miraculous text. It's been put together exactly how God would have wanted it, and it's therefore it says the exact right things. And but other than that, how can you justify that Paul's opinions or theological claims are the best? Why is he right?
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody who stayed tuned, I really do appreciate it. We were probably, me and Jonathan, I'm telling you, I know him by now. It's like we were already going to jump off, but you guys kept it alive, and Gary coming through with big super chats, obviously making this even more fun. I seriously thank all of you watching. Don't forget to like the video.
Do you want to just read before you go? Are you closing down?
I am, but go ahead. You want to close down with
do you want to read the page 227, just because it's just a nice summary?
I did say I was going to read something, didn't I? And then we never got to it.
Yeah,
you talking about the 227, 1, 2, 3,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the EAB.
Okay, I'm going to read I got to read above that real quick, briefly. Then this is really good. My concluding remarks would be that, and I have merely skimmed the surface in a way that does little justice to the scope and power of the argument. Paul is clearly referring to a two-body resurrection. This is wholly important because it shows, number one, a disconnect and contradiction between the earliest source, Paul, and the later Gospels. Two, that Paul did not have access to those same gospel traditions and narratives. So that means Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, he does not have that. Get that? You have to stop putting that in Paul's head. He doesn't know it. Number three, that the Gospels do look like legendary embellishments. Number four, that the empty tomb is a later embellishment. Number five, that the empty tomb is in direct contradiction to the claims of Paul's exchange of bodies, and so on. This then means, as mentioned at the start of this chapter, that the level of evidence for the Easter story is especially poor, since A, Paul, as the earliest and most reliable source, is merely asserting the fact of the resurrection without recourse to evidence such as witnesses and events, for example, the empty tomb. B, using the empty tomb as a primary source of historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus is unsound, based on the beliefs and claims of the earliest, most reliable source, Paul. So that reads the summary there. Ultimately, stop reading the Gospels into Paul, realize Paul's contradicting the later Gospels, and that helps you kind of, as that, you brought up the documentary Marketing the Messiah. I'm really good friends with the producer, and I interviewed him on the show, actually. I'm
Really?
close friends with him. I got to hook you up with him sometime. We'll hang out and talk.
Yeah, he commented on my blog. I wrote a piece on the documentary, and he commented on that, and he got involved, and that's great. But yeah,
he just shows that evolution. You see a constant development of the legend, and I believe these legends oftentimes are created to deal with problems from people who are going, hold on. Jesus was just a ghost, if anything. And he's, no, there's not. Does a ghost, does a spirit only, eat? Look at this, ha ha. They're already doing things to fix the problems. That's what I
absolutely. Yeah, and I think this is a more important argument, as hopefully we've expressed. It's a more important argument than I think it's often given credit for. I think once you understand this argument, the everything from the empty tomb onwards, well, from the tomb, from really. So if you say the empty tomb didn't exist, then you're saying Joseph of Arimathea never buried him in a tomb. So everything from Joseph of Arimathea onwards is arguably embellishment. As according to Paul, it didn't happen.
But Jonathan, what if it all is an embellishment? There's some people like that are in my chat. I love you too. Don't think I left you out. I'm just saying, how much of it can we really trust? We have arguments for why we do what we do. And so
I think it is all an embellishment, other than the fact that he was executed. I think that's it. I'm a historicist, but that's all you get from me.
Well, Dr. Bob and then we'll go, well, we could also see legends invented of executed people that are godmen. And so that's never close the door is all I'm saying.
And I don't, and I haven't. I reckon, like I've said to you before, Richard Carrier is a 66%, 67%, 33% mythicist, historicist, and I'm the other way around. So I'm a 33% historicist, sort of mythicist, 67% historicist. So there you go. I do not rule it out.
Yeah, me neither. Thank you again, Gary, for another super chat. Listen, I will remember the poor. On this. Don't worry. Whatever you're selling, I'm buying. Just don't curse me like Peter did Simon Magus. Seriously, thank you so much, everybody.
What a generous man. Thank you on behalf of Derek.
Well, it's all because of you, bro. This was a good show, and we've been doing a great series. I'm serious. This book sparks a lot of ideas, and it makes you think in ways you haven't thought before. I really hope everybody goes and gets the book.
Yeah, most time we normally do these conversations for you at like 9 a.m. or something. So it's not the ideal time.
I'm glad we did it at night. We hung out tonight. I mean, I sleep with it under my pillow. My dreams are amazing. When I go to the bathroom, I take the excess pages and wipe with it.
Yeah, so you know what? I've got an illustrated edition coming out with a naked Jesus, so that's great.
Oh, we need to do. I forgot to do it at the intro. Did you notice that?
No, I didn't actually.
I didn't do our intro with naked Jesus.
I have missed him.
Man, Blue Green, thank you so much. Email me, please. My email's MythVision or Derek@MythVisionPodcast.com or MythVisionPodcast@gmail.com. It's down in the description of the video, so feel free to email and reach out to me. Seriously, appreciate you guys. Real quick here, let me show you the YouTube channel. And I need to put this down in the comment section as well as Gary's topic discuss. This is Jonathan MS Pearce, the author of many books. This is his YouTube. Let's see.
Please help me out.
Look, I mean, honestly, MythVision has, I think, helped with these numbers some.
Oh man, you've blown it out of the water. So yeah, thank you so much.
Some of the people in the chat are already subscribers. If you're not, go over there and subscribe to him. Go show him some support. Even if you disagree, here's another person you can chat and comment your harassing comments to. You can go and bash Jonathan all you want on his videos. You can spend your days not just arguing against me. That's all.
I like a good bashing.
Yeah. And also his books. So you just had another one. Is that one released on Amazon yet?
Yes, it should be there. It should be Why I Am Atheist and Not a Theist, which is, was it not? Yeah, there it is. That one. Okay. So that is expressing my entire worldview from bottom upwards. So that's from ontology through epistemology, through to natural theology, through teleology to morality.
Wow. The next book we're going to deal with after this one is this book, The Nativity, A Critical Examination.
Yep. God damn it. Here it is. Yep. Definitely. That's jam-packed. It's a nice, quick read, but man, it is packed with awesomeness.
So I'm going to pop it up just so everybody can see it with me right here. Right there. Look at that.
Beautiful.
And then there's a question mark on Jesus. Is that Jesus?
No,
it's a staff. It's a staff.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So it's the third of my books, or maybe fourth with question marks on the covers. It's the fourth book, actually. I have 4 with question. I like a good question mark.
Thank you, Chained Minds Asylum, for subscribing. No Name, thank you for saying love your stuff. Jonathan, thank you so much, everybody. Seriously, I do really appreciate it. Melody, love you. Thank you for always showing up in the chat and just being the cheerleader down in the stands and just 2, 4, 6, 8. Who do we appreciate? MythVision. MythVision. You know what I'm saying?
I am going to write a blog post or do a video. Last video, there's Mitch Mazzarioli or one of your admin, I think. He asked a question, a super chat, who's your favorite philosopher of religion? And that's been playing on my mind because I was unable to give an answer. And it turns out I don't have a favorite philosopher of religion. But it's such an interesting question. And I have favorite biblical exegetes and I have favorite skeptics, but I don't have a favorite philosopher of religion. And I thought, why is that? And it's because I read philosophy in a completely different way than I read these other books. And so I'm going to do a video on that. And I just want to say I've not forgotten that question. So sometimes a question gets lost and I don't answer it, but I do think about it and cogitate on it. So
can you do like a top 10?
Well, no, because I don't. I just read papers and go, that's an interesting paper, but I don't read books of the same philosopher. Often, I occasionally do, but generally, like I've got books by. I've got all of John Loftus's books, Carrier, Bart Ehrman, all these sort of John Dominic Crossan, all these different, Raymond Brown. And yet, when it comes to like a philosopher, I'll read a particular paper on a particular idea. But I generally don't read books.
Wow.
On the whole, all of that. So there you go. Anyway, it's irrelevant to this topic, but it's just he did super chat that, and I didn't answer him adequately enough.
Yeah,
that makes me feel bad.
Damon Davis, thank you so much for that super sticker as well, my friend. I appreciate everything, everybody. I really do. Jonathan's reading skills are amazing. I really do appreciate the support, man. Everybody, join MythVision Patreon. Robert, thank you for the shout out on the Patreon. I was just about to plug it. I cannot tell you, everybody, I've been working very hard lately, and I'm tooting my own horn here. I mean it. I'm not kidding. I've been really, sometimes I'll take a little bit more of a break because I can only do so much before I lose my mind. I mean, honestly, I'll spend hours, 10, 12 hours editing. And I went down to Texas recently for the Faithless Forum and then was in California not long ago with Richard Carrier and Dennis McDonald. And I did these just recently came out. Today, I just launched this one. And this goes into mythicism and what are the Christians doing in the New Testament using the Hebrew Bible and what's going on with both Dennis and Richard. I mean, Born Under the Law, this gets highly technical, but very interesting. This one is the best video. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. This video right here, when I listen to Richard say this, I now know why people really don't quite understand mythicism and why they aren't convinced. This video right here is probably the best explanation I've ever heard Richard Carrier explain in any audio video format of mythicism and getting into the mind of Paul. I've never heard anything more well spelled out than this video. All of this is on Patreon. I have to leverage these, my hard work and all the videos. I pump a video out a day on YouTube every single day. And yet for every video I launch, I at least have 5 that go to Patreon. I'm creating more content than I'm actually putting out on YouTube. You get that early access. And you get to ask me questions. When I go to visit scholars, I record with my camera gear a designated video asking your question. This isn't I just, nonchalant. You have a dedicated video one day you can look back at or show grandchildren or whatever and say, that man's long gone. That legend of a man, Robert M. Price, with his thinking on biblical stuff. I got my video where my question was answered by MythVision Podcast. So I'm sorry for making a strong plug, but I'm not sorry, because I do this and then it hit load more and you have more. And it just goes on and on. So I'm a machine. My wife says, get off the computer. I try to listen to her. Sometimes I stay on the computer and I keep working. And lastly, for all the hard work and the love tonight from Gary, again, go subscribe to my friend Topic Discuss. Gary, thank you so much for all the super chats, everybody, and the help. Jonathan, for those who continue to think that they have the answers and the resurrection really happened and it's really a physical body, let's see what Jim Carrey has to say one more time.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Yeah! Beautiful.
I love that. I love that clip. I'm going to start using that whenever people come up with ridiculous things. Any final words, my friend?
Yeah, question everything, most particularly yourself, always. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I've got like a good dozen books that will make great Christmas presents. So, go for it, guys.
They're pretty. They're all pretty. The Nativity, Unholy Questions, Metamorphosis.
Yeah, a bit of fiction there.
I got this one. Did God create the universe from nothing?
That's great. So Richard Carrier said he reviewed that on Amazon and said it's the go-to book for the clam cosmological argument. So for criticizing that. So if you're interested in the KCA and the clam, that's the book you want to get.
Yeah. Dude, I definitely will be getting through all these. We'll be doing episodes on all of them. And I need, don't rush to send the book. I need to get the final one that you just did on your entire worldview, because this question comes up a lot. And the kind of stuff we do, like people are like, well, what do I replace it with then if I don't have Jesus in my life? And I get this question. What do I fill it with then if I don't have that? Because it does fill a hole and you just don't know how to live life.
Which I think is more of a psychological question.
Oh,
isn't
yeah.
it? And that's very interesting. Yeah.
We'll talk more about that, of course, too. Carlos Martinez, thank you for the super sticker. Thank you for all the love, everybody. Don't forget, here's that topic discuss. I almost feel like I need to be on here another hour for what Gary did tonight. I'm stuck, but I really will end up getting divorce papers sent to me. Look, Zachary's like trying to listen to the wife. I know what you mean. I seriously try to, because she knows what's best for me. She's the Holy Spirit. I'm not gonna lie. Like, she's the Holy Spirit. Like, she guides me. She knows. She protects me. She's got my back.
It's 1 o'clock here in the UK, and my partner's gone to bed and she's given up already. So,
oh, I'm so sorry. All right. Well, look, we're going to Naked Jesus as we're on our way out. And seriously, Jonathan,
Naked Jesus solves everything. Cheers, dude.
It solves it all. Love you, bro. Everybody get the book. We still have, how many videos do we have left to make the ending of this book?
I think 2, unless we combine the 2. But the vision and hallucinations one is going to be a pretty big one. And then the naturalistic theories is fairly big, but we could combine them. It's up to you.
It depends on how long we make that live, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So we might plan another afternoon one.
Yeah. I'm keen to get into the nativity because it's obviously that time of year, but yeah, whatever you want, man.
I'm ready to get to it too. So if you want to bang out one long one next time, we can. And let's do this again. Thank you so much. Love everybody. Seriously, let's check out what Jesus has going on. Where is this thing? I got so many videos now.
I love his holy hands.
His holy hands. Pay attention to it. Like the video. Share this out with somebody you know. Comment down below. Love you. Check out the description.